The towering spires of imperial hive cities pierce the toxic atmospheres of countless worlds, their adamantium and rockcrete foundations extending deep into planetary crust. These massive arcologies house billions of souls across hundreds of vertical levels, creating a complex hierarchy that determines everything from air quality to life expectancy. At the apex, the nobility and planetary governors enjoy filtered air and natural light in the spire tops, while the underhive dwellers scrape out existence in the perpetual darkness of the lower levels, where gangs have carved out their brutal dominions. The vertical stratification of hive cities follows a rigid pattern that has remained unchanged for millennia. The upper spire houses the planetary elite, their luxurious hab blocks connected by maglev transit systems and protected by void shields. Below them, the middle hive contains the manufactorums, administrative centers, and residential blocks for the working masses. Here, Arbites precincts maintain some semblance of imperial law, though corruption seeps down from above like the industrial runoff that stains the lower levels. The boundary between the middle hive and underhive marks more than just a change in altitude. It represents the edge of imperial authority. Gang territories begin in the lower reaches of the middle hive, where Arbites patrols become sporadic and the rule of law gives way to the law of the strongest. These transitional zones serve as crucial interfaces where gangs conduct business with legitimate hive citizens, offering protection services and black market goods to workers who venture into the gray areas between order and chaos. Gang territories in the underhive follow the physical constraints of the hive's architecture. Ancient hab blocks, some dating back to the Age of Strife, create natural boundaries that gangs fortify with razor wire, weapon emplacements, and improvised barricades. The Goliath gangs favor the industrial sectors, where their enhanced physiques allow them to operate heavy machinery and control access to manufactorum districts. Their territories often encompass entire foundry complexes, where they extract tribute from workers and maintain the ancient production lines that keep the hive's economy functioning. Escher gangs typically claim the vertical shafts and maintenance tunnels that honeycomb the hive walls. Their superior agility and knowledge of chemcraft make them ideal for controlling the complex networks of pipes, ventilation systems, and power conduits that connect different hive levels. These territories appear smaller on any two-dimensional map, but their three-dimensional nature gives Escher gangs unparalleled mobility and the ability to strike anywhere within their domain before melting back into the maze of service passages. Vansar territories cluster around techno-archaeological sites and ancient data cores. These gangs seek out the forgotten archives and STC fragments buried in the hive's foundations, establishing their bases in locations where they can tap into power grids and access ancient cogitator networks. Their territories often include multiple disconnected sites linked by secure communication networks, allowing them to coordinate activities across vast distances while maintaining operational security. Orlock gangs dominate the transport networks that connect different hive levels. Their territories follow the main arterial routes, cargo lifts, transit tubes, and the ancient roadways that wind through the hive's superstructure. By controlling these choke points, Orlock gangs can tax all movement of goods and people, making them wealthy enough to purchase military-grade equipment and maintain large numbers of fighters. Their roadhouses and way stations serve as neutral ground where other gangs can negotiate passage or conduct business under Orlock protection. Delaque gangs operate in the information networks rather than claiming traditional physical territories. Their influence extends through networks of informants, blackmail victims, and corrupt officials who span multiple hive levels. A Delaque territory might consist of a few inconspicuous safe houses connected by layers of human intelligence assets, giving them knowledge of events throughout the hive while remaining nearly invisible to their enemies. Cawdor gangs establish their territories around the makeshift shrines and places of worship that proliferate in the underhive's depths. These religious enclaves become fortified compounds where the faithful can seek sanctuary, and the gang can preach their particular interpretation of imperial doctrine. Cawdor territories often encompass the most desperate areas of the underhive, where their message of redemption through suffering resonates with the downtrodden masses. The symbiotic relationship between gangs and the legitimate hive population creates a complex web of interdependence that keeps both systems functioning. Workers in the middle hive often require gang protection when traveling through underhive sectors to reach distant work sites or visit family members living in the lower levels. These protection rackets operate on established rates, a few throne gelt for safe passage, more for armed escort, and substantial payments for long-term protection of valuable cargo shipments. Black market trade forms the economic backbone of gang operations. Legitimate hive citizens require goods and services that the imperial bureaucracy cannot or will not provide: recreational drugs, illegal weapons modifications, forged identification documents, and access to restricted technologies. Gangs fill this demand through their networks of contacts, scavengers, and corrupt officials. A typical transaction might involve an Escher gang supplying combat stims to Astra Militarum veterans suffering from battlefield trauma, or Van Sar technicians providing illegal augmetic upgrades to factory workers seeking to improve their productivity and earning potential. Labor recruitment represents another crucial connection between gangs and the hive economy. The constant attrition of underhive life creates opportunities for ambitious individuals to rise through gang ranks, while the legitimate economy's demand for expendable workers creates a market for gang members seeking to escape their current circumstances. Gangs often serve as unofficial employment agencies, providing workers for dangerous jobs that regular citizens won't accept: tunnel clearing operations, toxic waste disposal, and maintenance work in radioactive zones. The environmental hazards of the underhive create both challenges and opportunities for gang warfare. Toxic waste zones, legacy contamination from millennia of industrial production, form natural barriers between territories while providing cover for ambush tactics. These poisoned areas require specialized equipment or biological resistance to traverse safely, giving advantages to gangs with access to rebreathers, rad counters, and protective gear. Some gangs deliberately contaminate border areas with industrial chemicals or biological agents to create defensive barriers that their enemies cannot easily cross. Collapsed sectors present different tactical considerations. Ancient structural failures, seismic activity, or deliberate demolition create maze-like environments of rubble, twisted metal, and unstable debris. These areas favor small, mobile forces over large formations, making them ideal hunting grounds for Escher gangs or Delaque infiltrators. The collapsed zones also hide valuable salvage, weapons, equipment, and archaeotech buried under tons of debris that only the most determined scavengers will risk retrieving. Unstable hab blocks create dynamic battlefields where the environment itself becomes a weapon. Ancient buildings weakened by age, poor maintenance, or previous battles can collapse without warning, crushing fighters from both sides. Experienced gang leaders learn to read the signs of structural instability: the particular groan of overstressed support beams, the pattern of cracks in rockcrete walls, the way dust falls from ceiling joints during firefights. This knowledge becomes a tactical advantage, allowing skilled fighters to bring down entire sections of building on their enemies or create new routes through previously impassable areas. The scavenger economies that flourish in the underhive depths operate on principles of risk and reward that shape gang behavior and territorial control. The deeper levels of the hive contain the greatest treasures: archaeotech fragments from the dark age of technology, weapon caches left by long-dead gangs, and rare materials that have filtered down through centuries of industrial processes. However, these depths also harbor the greatest dangers: mutant creatures, unstable atmospheric conditions, and the ever-present risk of getting lost in the labyrinthine passages that extend far beyond any mapped territory. Gangs establish control over scavenging operations through a combination of force, expertise, and infrastructure. The most successful operations require teams of specialists, tech adepts capable of identifying valuable archaeotech, fighters to protect the scavenging teams, and logistics personnel to transport heavy salvage back to gang territory. Van Sar gangs excel at these operations due to their technical knowledge and access to advanced scanning equipment that can identify valuable targets buried under layers of debris and industrial waste. Access to weapon caches becomes a crucial factor in gang power dynamics. The underhive contains countless hidden armories, some left by defeated gangs, others established by paranoid hive citizens during times of unrest, and still others dating back to the age of strife, when the hive cities were battlegrounds between competing factions. These caches might contain anything from basic autogun ammunition to rare plasma weapons or even relic bolters from the Great Crusade era. The gang that controls access to such resources gains significant advantages over their rivals, leading to fierce competition for intelligence about cache locations. Rare materials found in the underhive depths include everything from precious metals and industrial chemicals to exotic substances created by millennia of technological processes. Some of these materials have legitimate applications in the hive's manufacturing sectors, while others serve specialized purposes in gang operations. Rare earth elements for advanced electronics, radioactive isotopes for improvised weapons, or chemical compounds that can be processed into combat drugs. The trade in these materials creates complex supply chains that connect gang territories to legitimate businesses in the Middle Hive, often through multiple layers of intermediaries who maintain plausible deniability about the material's origins. The control of archaeotech represents the ultimate prize in underhive scavenging operations. These fragments of Dark Age technology can revolutionize a gang's capabilities if properly understood and integrated into their equipment. A single SDC fragment might contain the plans for advanced weapons, medical devices, or manufacturing processes that could give a gang overwhelming advantages over their rivals. However, archaeotech also attracts unwanted attention from the Adeptus Mechanicus, who view any unauthorized possession of ancient technology as tech heresy punishable by death. The emergence of hive gangs traces its roots to the massive industrial expansion that swept across imperial worlds during the early millennia following the Great Crusade. As planetary populations swelled and manufacturing demands increased exponentially, entire continents were transformed into sprawling industrial complexes that would eventually grow into the towering hive cities of the present era. The original workforce consisted of organized labor collectives, disciplined groups of workers who maintained their own hierarchies, traditions, and mutual protection networks within the expanding industrial zones. These early worker collectives operated under imperial oversight, but maintained significant autonomy in their internal affairs. Shift supervisors, foremen, and senior technicians formed natural leadership structures that coordinated work assignments, resolved disputes, and represented worker interests to imperial administrators. The collectives developed their own codes of conduct, initiation rituals for new workers, and systems for sharing resources during times of scarcity. When production quotas increased beyond sustainable levels or working conditions deteriorated due to equipment failures or resource shortages, these same organizational structures provided the framework for coordinated resistance and work stoppages. The transition from legitimate worker organization to proto-gang activity occurred gradually as hive construction progressed upward and imperial administrative attention focused increasingly on the upper levels. Foremen who had once reported to imperial supervisors found themselves managing workers in sectors that rarely saw official oversight. The informal justice systems that worker collectives had developed to handle minor disputes expanded to address more serious crimes when Arbidi's presence became sporadic. Protection rackets emerged organically as experienced workers began charging newer arrivals for guidance through dangerous industrial zones and access to the best work assignments. Massive population displacements during hive expansion created the conditions for rapid gang formation as established social structures collapsed under the pressure of constant relocation. Entire residential districts were demolished to make room for new manufacturing complexes, forcing hundreds of thousands of residents into temporary housing that often became permanent slums in the lower hive levels. Extended families that had maintained stability for generations found themselves scattered across different sectors, with traditional authority figures losing influence as survival became the primary concern. The displaced populations brought with them fragments of their former communities, religious practices, trade skills, family loyalties, and cultural traditions that provided the foundation for new social organizations in the underhive. Former merchants organized black market networks to distribute scarce goods among the displaced. Religious leaders established underground congregations that would later evolve into the militant Cawdor gangs. Skilled craftsmen formed workshops that became the nucleus of Van Saar technical expertise. These organic developments occurred simultaneously across multiple hive levels, creating dozens of competing organizations that would eventually consolidate into the major gang houses through conquest, alliance, and absorption. The breakdown of imperial authority in the lower hive levels followed a predictable pattern as administrative resources concentrated on maintaining control over the productive upper levels. Arbites precincts that had once maintained order across broad territories found their patrol areas gradually reduced as manpower was reassigned to protect critical infrastructure and wealthy districts. The withdrawal was not sudden or dramatic, but rather a steady erosion of presence that left increasingly large gaps in law enforcement coverage. Judicial arbites who had previously handled major crimes in person began delegating authority to local enforcers and community leaders, creating a patchwork of semi-official authority that varied dramatically between different sectors. Some areas maintained quasi-legitimate governance through appointed magistrates and volunteer militias, while others descended into complete lawlessness as competing factions fought for control. The power vacuums created by this uneven withdrawal of imperial authority provided opportunities for the most organized and ruthless groups to establish territorial control. The early gang leaders who emerged during this period were often individuals who had held positions of responsibility within the legitimate hive hierarchy: security chiefs, shift supervisors, militia sergeants, and minor administrators, who possessed the organizational skills and local knowledge necessary to maintain order in the absence of imperial oversight. These leaders understood how to coordinate group activities, manage resources, and negotiate with both subordinates and external authorities. Their transition from legitimate authority figures to gang bosses occurred gradually as they adapted their existing skills to the changing circumstances of underhive life. Gang recruitment patterns developed along multiple pathways that reflected the diverse origins of underhive populations and the varied needs of different gang organizations. Press ganging represented the most direct method of expanding gang membership, particularly for organizations that required large numbers of fighters for territorial expansion or major conflicts. Experienced gangers would identify potential recruits in neutral zones, young adults with the physical capability for violence, but lacking the protection of established gang membership. The recruitment process typically involved staged confrontations where the target would be isolated, overwhelmed by superior numbers, and given the choice between joining the gang or facing severe consequences. Press gang operations required careful planning and intelligence gathering to identify suitable targets without triggering conflicts with rival organizations. Gangs developed networks of informants in crowded markets, work sites, and transit hubs who could identify unaffiliated individuals and report on their daily routines. The actual recruitment often took place in locations where the target would be vulnerable, isolated maintenance tunnels, abandoned hab blocks, or the boundary zones between gang territories where the victim's disappearance might be attributed to any number of hazards. Successful press ganging operations balanced intimidation with opportunity, presenting recruitment not merely as coercion, but as access to protection, resources, and advancement opportunities that would be unavailable to unaffiliated underhive dwellers. New recruits acquired through press ganging typically served probationary periods during which they performed dangerous or unpleasant tasks while demonstrating their loyalty and competence. Those who proved themselves during this initiation period could advance to full gang membership, while those who failed to adapt were often abandoned in hostile territory or sold to other organizations as indentured labor. Family inheritance patterns created stable power structures within established gangs as leadership positions, territorial claims, and specialized knowledge passed from one generation to the next. The harsh conditions of underhive life meant that successful gang families developed strong traditions of mutual support and collective responsibility that extended beyond immediate blood relations to include adopted members, marriage alliances, and long-term associates. These extended family networks provided the continuity necessary for gangs to maintain territorial control and organizational coherence across multiple generations. Inherited gang membership typically began in childhood, as young family members learned the skills, traditions, and loyalties that would define their adult roles within the organization. Children of prominent gang families received informal education in weapons handling, territorial geography, and negotiation tactics alongside more conventional survival skills. They participated in low-risk gang activities such as message delivery, equipment maintenance, and intelligence gathering that allowed them to demonstrate their capabilities while building relationships with other gang members. The inheritance of specific roles within gang hierarchies followed patterns that balanced family loyalty with practical competence requirements. Leadership positions typically passed to the most capable family members rather than following strict primogeniture, as the survival of the entire organization depended on effective decision-making under extreme pressure. Technical specialists such as weaponsmiths, chem dealers, and communications experts often trained multiple family members in their specialized skills to ensure continuity of operations if key individuals were killed or incapacitated. Voluntary recruitment attracted individuals seeking protection and survival advantages that gang membership could provide in the hostile environment of the underhive. These recruits typically approached gangs during periods of personal crisis, after losing employment, suffering attacks by rival gangs, or facing eviction from their living spaces. The voluntary nature of their recruitment often meant they possessed specific skills or resources that made them valuable additions to gang operations, rather than requiring extensive training and supervision. Skilled tradesmen represented particularly valuable voluntary recruits, as their expertise in manufacturing, repair, or specialized services could enhance gang capabilities while generating revenue through legitimate business activities. A master weaponsmith seeking gang protection might establish a workshop within gang territory, providing maintenance and modification services to gang members while also serving external customers under gang protection. Medical personnel, communications specialists, and transportation experts similarly brought capabilities that improved gang operations while justifying the resources invested in their protection and support. Voluntary recruits often negotiated specific terms for their membership that reflected their bargaining position and the value they brought to the organization. These agreements might include guarantees of protection for family members, access to specific resources or territories, or limitations on the types of activities they would be required to perform. The negotiated nature of voluntary recruitment created more complex relationships within gang hierarchies, as these members retained some degree of autonomy while accepting the obligations and loyalties that gang membership required. The influence of failed Imperial Guard recruitment drives on early gang development created a significant population of individuals with military training, but no legitimate outlet for their skills. Imperial Guard recruitment typically targeted young adults from the middle and lower hive levels, promising advancement opportunities and escape from the grinding poverty of underhive existence. However, the recruitment process itself was often chaotic and corrupt, with quotas that exceeded the actual need for soldiers and selection criteria that favored political connections over military aptitude. Failed recruits who had undergone partial training but were ultimately rejected found themselves in possession of valuable combat skills, but lacking the credentials necessary for legitimate employment in Hive security forces. These individuals possessed knowledge of Imperial military doctrine, experience with standard pattern weapons, and familiarity with small unit tactics that made them extremely valuable to emerging gang organizations. Their military training provided a foundation for the disciplined approach to violence that distinguished successful gangs from mere criminal mobs. The integration of failed Imperial Guard recruits into gang hierarchies often followed military patterns, with former drill sergeants becoming gang enforcers and failed officer candidates assuming leadership roles in gang military operations. These individuals brought concepts of unit cohesion, tactical planning, and logistical support that transformed gang warfare from chaotic street fighting into organized military campaigns. Their influence can be seen in the adoption of military terminology, rank structures, and operational procedures that characterize modern gang organizations. Disbanded planetary defense force units provided another source of military expertise for developing gang organizations. PDF units were often dissolved during periods of political upheaval, budget constraints, or reorganization of planetary defense priorities. The sudden unemployment of trained soldiers who possessed knowledge of local terrain, defensive positions, and military supply networks created opportunities for gangs to acquire both personnel and equipment from legitimate military sources. Former PDF soldiers brought different capabilities than failed Imperial Guard recruits, as their training focused on defensive operations, local knowledge, and coordination with civilian authorities, rather than the offensive operations emphasized in Imperial Guard doctrine. These skills proved particularly valuable for gangs seeking to establish and defend territorial claims, as PDF veterans understood how to fortify positions, establish supply lines, and coordinate intelligence networks across extended areas of operation. Their knowledge of official military procedures and communication protocols also provided advantages in conflicts with legitimate security forces, as they could anticipate and counter standard Imperial tactical responses. The equipment and weapons that accompanied disbanded PDF units often formed the core arsenals of early gang organizations. PDF armories contained standardized Imperial weapons, ammunition stockpiles, communication equipment, and protective gear that far exceeded the improvised equipment available to civilian organizations. The acquisition of this military hardware required careful negotiation with corrupt officials, black market dealers, or direct theft from poorly guarded storage facilities, but the resulting capabilities transformed gang military effectiveness and established the foundation for the sophisticated weapon systems that characterize modern gang warfare. The organizational structures that govern hive gangs reflect both the harsh realities of underhive survival and the complex social dynamics inherited from their origins as worker collectives and displaced populations. At the apex of every gang hierarchy stands the gang leader, whose authority derives from a combination of personal combat prowess, strategic acumen, and the ability to maintain loyalty through both reward and intimidation. These leaders adopt titles that reflect their gang's cultural identity and territorial aspirations. Goliath gangs favor direct appellations like boss or chief, while Escher leaders often use more sophisticated designations such as matriarch or prime. Van Saar gangs employ technical terminology, with leaders called prime technician or chief engineer, emphasizing their mastery of archaeotech and manufacturing processes. The path to gang leadership varies significantly between different houses and individual organizations, but all successful leaders must demonstrate their capacity to make life and death decisions under extreme pressure. Combat trials remain the most common method of establishing leadership credentials, particularly among Goliath and Cawdor gangs, where personal strength and religious fervor respectively determine social standing. These trials take various forms depending on gang traditions: single combat against the current leader, survival tests in the most dangerous areas of gang territory, or complex challenges that test multiple skills simultaneously. Leadership succession through inheritance creates more stable power structures, but requires careful management of family dynamics and organizational politics. The children of gang leaders grow up understanding that their eventual assumption of power depends not only on their bloodline, but on their ability to command respect from veteran gang members who may have served alongside their parents for decades. These potential heirs typically spend years proving themselves in increasingly dangerous assignments, building personal relationships with key lieutenants, and demonstrating the tactical and strategic thinking necessary for effective leadership. Political maneuvering within gang hierarchies often involves complex alliances between different factions within the organization. Senior lieutenants may support different candidates for leadership based on their personal relationships, ideological preferences, or calculations about which leader would best advance their own positions. These internal politics can become particularly intense during periods of leadership transition, when the gang's enemies may attempt to exploit internal divisions through targeted assassinations or propaganda campaigns designed to destabilize the succession process. Lieutenant positions within gang hierarchies serve as both operational commanders and potential successors to gang leadership. These individuals typically control specific aspects of gang operations, territorial defense, recruitment and training, trade negotiations, or specialized activities such as tech acquisition or religious instruction. The most effective lieutenants develop expertise that makes them indispensable to gang operations, while building personal loyalty networks that could support their eventual advancement to leadership positions. The relationship between gang leaders and their lieutenants requires constant attention to balance delegation of authority with maintenance of overall control. Lieutenants who become too independent may develop ambitions that threaten the current leadership, while those who lack sufficient autonomy cannot respond effectively to rapidly changing tactical situations. Successful gang leaders learn to read the personalities and motivations of their subordinates, providing opportunities for advancement and recognition while maintaining clear boundaries around their ultimate authority. Specialist roles within gang hierarchies reflect the technical and operational requirements of underhive warfare and survival. Heavy weapon specialists among Goliath gangs undergo extensive training in the maintenance and tactical employment of plasma cannons, heavy stubbers, and missile launchers that provide fire support during major gang conflicts. These specialists typically command higher status and better equipment than standard fighters, but their prominence also makes them priority targets for enemy assassins and infiltrators. Combat medics serve crucial functions in all gang organizations, as the absence of legitimate medical facilities in the underhive makes gang-affiliated doctors and chirurgeons essential for maintaining operational effectiveness. These specialists often possess knowledge of both traditional Imperial medical techniques and the improvised treatments necessary for dealing with toxic exposure, radiation poisoning, and the exotic injuries caused by archaeotech weapons. Their medical expertise makes them valuable assets that rival gangs may attempt to capture or recruit through various means. Technical specialists within Van Saar gangs occupy positions of particular importance due to their ability to maintain and modify the advanced equipment that gives their organization significant advantages over rival gangs. These individuals often possess knowledge fragments inherited from the dark age of technology, allowing them to repair archaeotech devices, modify standard Imperial equipment, and occasionally create entirely new weapons or tools. Their expertise makes them targets for both rival gangs seeking to acquire their knowledge and Adeptus Mechanicus forces investigating unauthorized technological activities. Communications specialists manage the information networks that allow gang leaders to coordinate activities across their territories and maintain contact with allies and trading partners. These individuals typically operate sophisticated Vox equipment, encrypted data networks, and networks of human informants that provide intelligence about rival gang activities, Imperial security operations, and opportunities for profitable ventures. Their work requires both technical expertise and social skills, as they must maintain relationships with contacts throughout the hive while protecting sensitive information from enemy infiltration. The juvenile members of gang organizations occupy a unique position within gang hierarchies, as they represent both the future of the organization and its most expendable assets. These young fighters, commonly called juves, typically range in age from early adolescence to young adulthood and serve in roles that combine learning opportunities with genuine operational responsibilities. Their assignments often involve high-risk activities such as reconnaissance missions, message delivery through hostile territory, and participation in raids where their inexperience may lead to casualties that veteran gang members cannot afford. Juve training programs vary significantly between different gang houses, reflecting their distinct cultures and operational requirements. Goliath Juves undergo intensive physical conditioning and weapons training that emphasizes personal combat and the operation of heavy industrial equipment. These training regimens often take place in active manufacturing facilities, where Juves learn to fight effectively in the industrial environments that characterize Goliath territory, while developing the technical skills necessary for maintaining gang equipment and facilities. Escher Juve training focuses on agility, stealth, and the chemical knowledge that distinguishes their gang from other organizations. Young Escher fighters learn to navigate the complex three-dimensional environments of Hive infrastructure, developing the climbing and acrobatic skills that allow them to move through ventilation systems, maintenance tunnels, and the external surfaces of Hive structures. Their chemical education includes both the production of combat drugs and toxins, as well as the antidotes and treatments necessary for surviving in the chemically contaminated environments that characterize much of the underhive. Vansar Juves receive technical education that begins with basic maintenance and repair skills before advancing to more specialized knowledge of electronics, mechanics, and archaeotech principles. These young gang members often serve apprenticeships with senior specialists, learning through hands-on experience with the advanced equipment that forms the foundation of Vansar power. Their education includes not only technical skills, but also the security protocols necessary for protecting gang technological secrets from rival organizations and imperial authorities. Initiation rituals within gang organizations serve multiple functions beyond simple hazing, as they establish the psychological bonds necessary for survival in the hostile environment of the underhive, while demonstrating the initiate's commitment to gang values and objectives. These ceremonies often incorporate elements that reflect the gang's cultural identity and operational requirements, creating shared experiences that build unit cohesion and mutual trust among gang members. Goliath initiation rituals typically involve physical challenges that test the initiate's strength, endurance, and pain tolerance, while demonstrating their willingness to engage in violence on behalf of the gang. These trials might include bare-handed combat against multiple opponents, endurance tests involving the carrying of heavy equipment across difficult terrain, or exposure to the toxic industrial environments that characterize Goliath territory. The physical nature of these initiations reinforces the gang's emphasis on personal strength and creates bonds between initiates who have shared the experience of overcoming extreme physical challenges. Escher initiation ceremonies often involve complex chemical trials that test the initiate's knowledge of toxicology while demonstrating their resistance to various poisons and combat drugs. These rituals serve practical purposes beyond their ceremonial significance, as they identify individuals with natural resistance to specific toxins while building tolerance to the chemical agents that Escher gangs employ in combat operations. The shared experience of surviving chemical exposure creates strong bonds between gang members while establishing hierarchies based on chemical knowledge and resistance. Cawdor initiation rituals incorporate religious elements that reflect the gang's interpretation of imperial doctrine and their role as instruments of the emperor's will in the underhive. These ceremonies often involve pilgrimages to sacred sites within gang territory, participation in religious services that combine imperial theology with local traditions, and oaths of loyalty that invoke both gang leadership and imperial authority. The religious nature of these initiations creates psychological bonds that extend beyond simple gang loyalty to encompass broader concepts of duty and divine purpose. Loyalty oaths within gang organizations create formal bonds that define the relationships between gang members and establish the expectations for behavior under various circumstances. These oaths typically include specific provisions for mutual support during combat operations, sharing of resources during periods of scarcity, and protection of gang secrets from external threats. The language and ceremony surrounding these oaths vary significantly between different gangs, but all serve to create psychological and social pressure that discourages desertion and betrayal. The enforcement of loyalty oaths requires constant attention from gang leadership, as the harsh conditions of underhive life create numerous temptations for gang members to abandon their obligations in favor of immediate survival or personal advancement. Gang leaders employ various methods to maintain loyalty, including systems of mutual surveillance, where gang members monitor each other's behavior, reward systems that provide benefits for demonstrated loyalty, and punishment protocols that make the consequences of betrayal clear to all gang members. Reputation management within gang hierarchies involves the careful cultivation of personal and organizational images that enhance the gang's effectiveness while deterring challenges from rival organizations. Individual gang members build reputations through their performance in combat operations, their reliability in carrying out assigned tasks, and their adherence to gang codes of conduct. These personal reputations contribute to the overall reputation of the gang, while providing pathways for individual advancement within the organizational hierarchy. Fear serves as a crucial tool for maintaining authority within gang organizations, as the threat of violence provides immediate consequences for disobedience while deterring challenges to established leadership. Gang leaders must balance the use of fear with other motivational tools, as excessive reliance on intimidation can create resentment and instability within the organization, while insufficient enforcement of discipline can lead to chaos and organizational collapse. The cultivation of fear requires careful attention to timing, targeting, and proportionality, as poorly executed displays of violence can undermine rather than reinforce leadership authority. Effective gang leaders learn to identify situations where decisive action will reinforce their position while avoiding unnecessary brutality that might alienate potential allies or create martyrs among their enemies. The reputation for controlled but decisive violence often proves more effective than random brutality in maintaining organizational discipline and deterring external threats. Gender roles within gang organizations reflect both the cultural traditions inherited from their origins and the practical requirements of underhive survival. Male-dominated gangs, such as the Goliaths, maintain traditional gender hierarchies, where physical strength and industrial expertise determine social status, while female-dominated organizations like the Eschers create alternative power structures based on different criteria such as chemical knowledge and agility. Notable female gang leaders have achieved prominence across various hive cities through their ability to adapt traditional leadership skills to the unique challenges of underhive warfare. These leaders often face additional challenges in establishing their authority, particularly when dealing with rival gangs that may underestimate their capabilities based on gender assumptions. However, successful female gang leaders frequently turn these assumptions to their advantage, using their opponents' expectations to create tactical and strategic opportunities. The role of gang families extends beyond simple blood relationships to encompass complex networks of loyalty, mutual obligation, and shared identity that provide stability and continuity for gang organizations. These family structures often include adopted members, marriage alliances between different gangs, and long-term associates who have earned inclusion through demonstrated loyalty and shared sacrifice. The extended nature of gang families creates resilient support networks that can survive the loss of individual members while maintaining organizational coherence across multiple generations. Bloodline considerations in gang leadership succession involve balancing family loyalty with practical competence requirements, as the survival of the entire organization depends on effective leadership under extreme pressure. Gang families typically maintain careful records of genealogy and achievement that document both blood relationships and the accomplishments that qualify individuals for leadership positions. These records serve as both historical documents and practical tools for resolving succession disputes, while maintaining organizational legitimacy. Leadership succession through combat trials provides opportunities for non-family members to achieve positions of authority while ensuring that gang leadership remains in the hands of the most capable individuals. These trials typically involve complex challenges that test multiple aspects of leadership capability rather than simple physical combat, as effective gang leaders must possess strategic thinking, negotiation skills, and the ability to inspire loyalty among their subordinates. The public nature of these trials helps establish the legitimacy of new leaders while demonstrating the gang's commitment to meritocratic principles. Political maneuvering within gang succession processes often involves complex negotiations between different factions within the organization, each supporting candidates who represent their interests and values. These political dynamics can become particularly intense when the succession involves choosing between family members with different qualifications, or when external pressures create urgency around the leadership transition. Successful management of succession politics requires careful attention to the concerns and motivations of different gang factions, while maintaining organizational unity during vulnerable transition periods. The establishment of territorial control represents the fundamental imperative that drives gang warfare throughout the underhive, as access to resources, strategic positions, and population centers determines the difference between organizational survival and extinction. Gang territories operate as complex three-dimensional spaces that extend vertically through multiple hive levels, while incorporating the intricate networks of tunnels, maintenance shafts, and abandoned structures that honeycomb the ancient foundations of hive cities. The physical boundaries of these territories shift constantly as gangs expand into new areas, lose ground to rivals, or adapt to changes in the underlying infrastructure caused by structural collapse, industrial accidents, or deliberate sabotage operations. Toll collection systems form the economic backbone of territorial control, as gangs extract tribute from individuals and organizations seeking passage through their domains. These operations require sophisticated intelligence networks to identify valuable targets, while maintaining the operational security necessary to prevent rival gangs from intercepting tribute payments or targeting collection teams. Goliath gangs typically establish toll stations at major transit choke points where their superior firepower can deter resistance, while their industrial expertise allows them to maintain the heavy barriers and weapon emplacements necessary for controlling large volumes of traffic. The collection process itself follows established protocols that balance efficiency with security considerations. Gang members manning toll stations maintain detailed records of regular travelers, cargo shipments, and payment schedules that allow them to identify unusual activity or potential security threats. Standard rates vary according to the type of cargo, the destination within gang territory, and the level of protection required during transit. Basic passage for individual travelers might cost a few thrown gelt, while heavily armed convoys carrying valuable manufactured goods could face tribute demands equivalent to several months' wages for middle hive workers. Enforcement of toll collection requires careful calibration of violence and negotiation, as excessive aggression can drive away legitimate traffic, while insufficient deterrence encourages non-payment and challenges to gang authority. Experienced toll collectors develop sophisticated understanding of human psychology and negotiation tactics that allow them to extract maximum tribute without creating unnecessary conflicts. They learn to identify travelers who possess hidden wealth, recognize the signs of potential resistance, and adapt their approach based on the cultural background and apparent desperation of their targets. Checkpoint establishment creates permanent infrastructure that projects gang power while providing defensive positions against rival organizations and Imperial security forces. These installations typically incorporate salvaged materials from industrial sites, abandoned vehicles, and military equipment acquired through black market channels or raids on Imperial facilities. Vansar gangs construct particularly sophisticated checkpoints that integrate advanced sensor systems, automated weapon platforms, and communication networks that provide early warning of approaching threats, while coordinating responses across multiple defensive positions. The architectural design of gang checkpoints reflects both practical defensive requirements and the cultural identity of the controlling organization. Goliath checkpoints resemble miniature fortresses constructed from industrial materials, with heavy blast barriers, overlapping fields of fire, and reinforced bunkers that can withstand sustained assault by rival gangs or Imperial security forces. These installations often incorporate active manufacturing equipment that serves dual purposes of maintaining gang weapons and equipment while demonstrating the organization's industrial capabilities to potential allies and enemies. Escher checkpoints exploit vertical terrain and concealed positions that maximize their advantages in mobility and stealth while minimizing their exposure to heavy weapons fire. These installations often appear less substantial than their Goliath counterparts, but incorporate sophisticated trap systems, hidden firing positions, and escape routes that allow defenders to conduct layered defense operations. The apparent vulnerability of Escher checkpoints frequently lures overconfident attackers into carefully prepared kill zones, where superior knowledge of local terrain provides decisive tactical advantages. Cawdor checkpoints combine defensive functionality with religious symbolism through the incorporation of shrine elements, devotional inscriptions, and architectural features that reflect their interpretation of Imperial theology. These installations serve as both military positions and centers of religious activity, where gang members conduct prayer services, religious instruction, and community outreach programs designed to build support among local populations. The religious significance of these positions often makes them targets for rival gangs seeking to demonstrate their power while providing Cawdor defenders with additional motivation during siege operations. The marking of gang boundaries requires constant maintenance and strategic placement to communicate territorial claims while gathering intelligence about rival gang activities and population movements. Graffiti serves as the most visible form of boundary marking, with each gang developing distinctive artistic styles, symbolic languages, and placement patterns that convey complex information about territorial extent, recent activities, and current relationships with neighboring organizations. These markings function as both territorial claims and communication networks that allow gang members to leave messages for their colleagues, while warning rivals about the consequences of territorial violations. Goliath boundary markings typically emphasize industrial themes and displays of strength through the use of heavy materials, permanent installations, and imagery that celebrates manufacturing prowess and physical power. Their territorial markers often incorporate functional elements such as weapon emplacements, supply caches, or communication equipment that serve operational purposes while demonstrating the gang's technical capabilities. The permanence and scale of Goliath markings reflect their preference for direct confrontation and their confidence in their ability to defend their territorial claims through superior firepower. Escher boundary markings exploit three-dimensional spaces and concealed locations that reflect their emphasis on mobility and stealth operations. These markings often appear in locations that require climbing skills or knowledge of hidden passages to access, creating a form of coded communication that rival gangs cannot easily monitor or counterfeit. The chemical knowledge that distinguishes Escher gangs allows them to create markings using specialized compounds that change color over time, respond to specific environmental conditions, or remain invisible except under particular lighting conditions. Van Saar territorial markings incorporate technological elements that demonstrate their mastery of advanced equipment while providing functional capabilities such as surveillance, communication, or defensive systems. These installations might include automated sensors that record the identity and activities of individuals entering gang territory, holographic displays that project territorial warnings or propaganda messages, or concealed weapon systems that activate when unauthorized personnel approach sensitive locations. The technological sophistication of Van Saar markings serves both practical and psychological purposes by demonstrating capabilities that rival gangs cannot easily replicate or counter. Totem placement represents a more permanent and culturally significant form of territorial marking that incorporates religious, ancestral, or ideological elements specific to each gang's identity and traditions. These installations typically mark the most important boundaries within gang territory, while serving as rallying points during conflicts and ceremonial centers for gang religious or cultural activities. The construction and placement of totems often involves elaborate rituals that reinforce gang unity while demonstrating commitment to territorial defense. Cawdor totems incorporate extensive religious symbolism drawn from their interpretation of imperial theology, often featuring devotional texts, religious imagery, and architectural elements that transform territorial markers into functional shrine complexes. These installations serve multiple purposes as territorial boundaries, religious centers, and defensive positions that provide both spiritual and tactical advantages during conflicts with rival gangs or imperial authorities. The religious significance of Cawdor totems often makes them focal points for gang identity and morale, while attracting pilgrims and converts from surrounding populations. Delaque totems typically appear unremarkable to casual observation, but incorporate sophisticated surveillance equipment, hidden compartments, and communication systems that support the gang's intelligence operations while marking territorial boundaries. These installations often masquerade as maintenance equipment, abandoned structures, or commercial facilities that blend seamlessly into the urban environment while providing concealed observation points and secure communication nodes for gang operations. The economics of territorial control revolve around access to the fundamental resources necessary for survival in the harsh environment of the underhive, with water sources representing the most critical and contested assets in gang territorial calculations. The ancient water distribution systems that serve hive cities operate through complex networks of pipes, pumping stations, and storage facilities that extend deep into the hive foundations, where gang territories overlap with essential infrastructure. Control over these water sources provides gangs with leverage over both rival organizations and civilian populations, while generating revenue through the sale of clean water to communities lacking direct access to municipal systems. Water source control requires specialized technical knowledge and equipment to maintain aging infrastructure, while defending against sabotage attempts by rival gangs seeking to disrupt enemy operations or capture valuable facilities. Vansar gangs excel at these operations due to their technical expertise and access to advanced diagnostic equipment that can identify problems in complex distribution systems before they cause catastrophic failures. Their control over water sources often extends beyond simple territorial possession to include the technical capability necessary for maintaining and expanding distribution networks. The contamination of water sources represents a common tactic in gang warfare, as the introduction of industrial chemicals, biological agents, or radioactive materials can render entire water systems unusable, while forcing enemy populations to seek alternative sources under hostile gang control. These sabotage operations require careful planning and specialized knowledge to avoid contaminating the attacker's own water supplies, while ensuring that the effects persist long enough to achieve strategic objectives. The threat of water contamination often proves more effective than actual attacks, as the fear of poisoning can drive population movements and resource allocation decisions that favor the threatening gang's strategic position. Food distribution points create additional opportunities for territorial control and revenue generation as gangs establish markets, storage facilities, and transportation networks that connect food production areas with consumer populations throughout the underhive. These operations often involve complex relationships with legitimate businesses in the middle hive levels, as gang-controlled distribution networks provide access to markets that official channels cannot reach, while offering protection services that legitimate businesses require when operating in dangerous underhive territories. The control of food distribution requires sophisticated logistics capabilities and security measures to protect valuable cargo from theft, while maintaining the quality and safety of food products during storage and transportation. Orlock gangs typically dominate these operations due to their expertise in transportation and their control over the major transit routes that connect different hive levels. Their roadhouses and way stations serve as secure storage facilities and neutral meeting grounds, where different gangs can negotiate food distribution agreements without triggering territorial conflicts. Transit route control provides gangs with opportunities to extract tribute from all movement of goods and people, while gathering intelligence about rival gang activities, imperial security operations, and economic opportunities throughout the hive. These operations require detailed knowledge of the complex transportation networks that connect different hive levels, including the scheduling patterns, security procedures, and maintenance requirements that govern legitimate transportation systems. Gang control over transit routes often extends to the provision of alternative transportation services for individuals and organizations seeking to avoid official channels or requiring access to restricted areas. The establishment of transit route control typically involves the construction of permanent installations at strategic choke points, where geography or infrastructure creates natural barriers to movement. These positions might include bridges across toxic waste channels, elevator stations that provide access between different hive levels, or tunnel intersections where multiple transportation routes converge. The defensive value of these positions often makes them focal points for intense conflicts between rival gangs seeking to expand their territorial control or disrupt enemy operations. Escalation patterns in territorial conflicts follow predictable sequences that reflect the strategic calculations and resource constraints that govern gang warfare in the underhive environment. Initial phases of territorial disputes typically involve intimidation tactics designed to test enemy resolve while avoiding the costs and risks associated with direct military confrontation. These operations might include the harassment of enemy patrols, the vandalism of territorial markings, or the disruption of economic activities within contested areas through sabotage or interference with normal operations. Intimidation campaigns require careful orchestration to maintain pressure on enemy organizations, while avoiding provocations that might trigger premature escalation to full-scale warfare. Gang leaders must balance the need to demonstrate strength and resolve with the practical limitations imposed by their available resources and the strategic importance of the contested territory. Successful intimidation operations often target the morale and confidence of enemy gang members rather than attempting to inflict significant material damage, as psychological pressure can achieve territorial objectives without the casualties and resource expenditure associated with direct combat. Sabotage operations represent the next level of escalation in territorial conflicts, as gangs attempt to degrade enemy capabilities while maintaining plausible deniability about their involvement in hostile activities. These operations typically target infrastructure elements that support enemy territorial control, such as communication systems, power supplies, water distribution networks, or transportation facilities. The technical expertise required for effective sabotage operations varies significantly depending on the target and the desired level of damage, with some operations requiring only basic knowledge of explosives or mechanical systems, while others demand sophisticated understanding of complex technological systems. Industrial sabotage operations often focus on the manufacturing facilities and heavy equipment that provide economic foundations for gang territorial control. Goliath gangs face particular vulnerability to these attacks due to their dependence on complex industrial systems that require constant maintenance and skilled operation. Sabotage teams might target critical components of manufacturing equipment, introduce contaminants into industrial processes, or disrupt power supplies that support heavy machinery operations. The effects of successful industrial sabotage can persist for extended periods as gangs struggle to acquire replacement parts or repair specialized equipment. Communication system disruption represents a particularly effective form of sabotage that can degrade enemy coordination capabilities while creating opportunities for follow-up attacks during the confusion that results from loss of command and control. These operations might involve the physical destruction of communication equipment, the introduction of electronic interference that disrupts radio communications, or the infiltration of enemy communication networks to gather intelligence or spread disinformation. Van Saar gangs possess significant advantages in these operations due to their technical expertise and access to sophisticated electronic warfare equipment. The transition to full-scale warfare typically occurs when intimidation and sabotage operations fail to achieve territorial objectives, or when strategic considerations make direct confrontation unavoidable despite the associated costs and risks. These conflicts involve the deployment of heavy weapon systems, armored vehicles, and large numbers of fighters in coordinated military operations designed to capture and hold contested territory through superior firepower and tactical coordination. The scale and intensity of full-scale gang warfare often approaches the level of military campaigns between Imperial Guard regiments, with similar requirements for logistics support, medical services, and strategic planning. Heavy weapons deployment in gang warfare includes plasma cannons, missile launchers, heavy bolters, and improvised explosive devices that can destroy fortified positions while inflicting massive casualties on enemy forces. The acquisition and maintenance of these weapon systems requires significant financial resources and technical expertise, making their deployment a major strategic decision that commits gangs to sustained military operations. Goliath gangs typically possess the greatest advantages in heavy weapons warfare due to their industrial capabilities and their experience with large-scale manufacturing equipment that shares operational principles with military hardware. Vehicle assault operations incorporate the use of modified civilian vehicles, captured military equipment, and improvised armored fighting vehicles in coordinated attacks against enemy territorial positions. These operations require specialized knowledge of vehicle maintenance, tactical employment, and the integration of mobile platforms with infantry operations. Orlock gangs excel at vehicle-based warfare due to their control over transportation networks and their expertise in vehicle modification and maintenance. Their operations often involve fast-moving raids that exploit mobility advantages to strike enemy positions before withdrawing to secure areas within their own territory. The coordination of combined arms operations requires sophisticated command and control capabilities that allow gang leaders to synchronize the activities of different types of units, while adapting to changing tactical situations during extended military campaigns. These operations typically involve the integration of infantry assault teams, heavy weapons support units, vehicle-mounted forces, and specialized capabilities such as demolitions experts or technical specialists. The complexity of combined arms warfare often determines the outcome of major territorial conflicts, as gangs with superior coordination capabilities can achieve decisive advantages even when facing numerically superior enemies. Neutral zones within gang territories serve crucial functions in maintaining the complex balance of power that prevents mutually destructive conflicts while providing spaces where different organizations can conduct necessary business without triggering territorial disputes. These areas typically develop around locations that possess strategic importance to multiple gangs or provide services that benefit all parties involved in their maintenance. The establishment and governance of neutral zones requires careful negotiation and ongoing diplomatic efforts to maintain the agreements that prevent these areas from becoming battlegrounds. Market districts often function as neutral zones, where different gangs can conduct trade operations without the security concerns that would arise from entering enemy territory. These areas typically operate under complex agreements that define acceptable behavior, dispute resolution procedures, and the distribution of security responsibilities among the participating gangs. The economic benefits of maintaining neutral market access often outweigh the territorial advantages that might result from capturing these areas, creating incentives for cooperation, even between otherwise hostile organizations. Medical facilities represent another common form of neutral zone, as the harsh conditions of underhive life create universal need for medical services that transcend gang loyalties and territorial disputes. These facilities often operate under agreements that guarantee safe passage for medical personnel and patients, while prohibiting the use of medical facilities for military purposes or intelligence gathering. The maintenance of medical neutrality requires constant vigilance and diplomatic intervention to prevent violations that could destroy the trust necessary for these agreements to function effectively. Temporary truces provide mechanisms for suspending hostilities during periods when continued warfare would be counterproductive for all parties involved. These agreements typically address specific circumstances, such as external threats from Imperial security forces, natural disasters that require coordinated response efforts, or economic opportunities that benefit multiple gangs through cooperation rather than competition. The negotiation and enforcement of temporary truces requires sophisticated diplomatic capabilities and the ability to identify mutual interests that transcend immediate territorial disputes. External threat responses often create opportunities for temporary cooperation between rival gangs when Imperial security operations or incursions by external enemies threaten the entire underhive ecosystem. These situations require rapid coordination of defensive efforts while maintaining the flexibility to resume normal territorial competition once the external threat has been addressed. The success of these cooperative efforts often depends on the existence of established communication channels and diplomatic relationships that allow for rapid negotiation and implementation of joint defensive measures. Economic opportunity truces allow rival gangs to cooperate in ventures that require resources or capabilities beyond what any single organization can provide. These agreements might involve joint salvage operations in dangerous areas, coordinated attacks against common enemies, or the establishment of trade relationships that benefit all participating parties. The temporary nature of these truces requires careful management to prevent the development of permanent alliances that might destabilize the broader balance of power within the underhive. Gang diplomacy operates through complex networks of formal and informal communication channels that allow rival organizations to negotiate agreements, resolve disputes, and coordinate activities without resorting to warfare. These diplomatic relationships often develop through personal connections between individual gang members, shared cultural or religious traditions, or mutual respect earned through previous conflicts or cooperative ventures. The effectiveness of gang diplomacy depends on the existence of recognized protocols for communication, negotiation procedures that all parties understand and respect, and enforcement mechanisms that ensure compliance with negotiated agreements. Diplomatic protocols within gang negotiations typically involve the use of neutral intermediaries, standardized communication procedures, and security arrangements that protect negotiating parties from attack during diplomatic meetings. These protocols often incorporate elements drawn from imperial administrative procedures, military traditions, or religious practices that provide familiar frameworks for conducting complex negotiations. The development of effective diplomatic protocols requires ongoing refinement based on experience with successful and failed negotiations, while adapting to changes in gang relationships and territorial situations. The arsenal of any underhive gang begins with the crude but reliable weapons that can be manufactured, acquired, or improvised from the industrial detritus that accumulates in the lower levels of hive cities. Auto pistols represent the most common sidearm among gang fighters, their simple design allowing for easy maintenance and ammunition production in the makeshift workshops that proliferate throughout gang territories. These weapons fire solid slugs from detachable magazines, their reliable mechanism tolerating the dust, moisture, and chemical contamination that characterize the underhive environment. Gang armorers frequently modify auto pistols with extended barrels, enlarged magazines, or crude compensators welded to the muzzle to improve accuracy and firepower. Stub guns occupy a similar role as basic gang weapons, their revolver-style mechanisms proving even more resistant to environmental hazards than the magazine-fed auto pistols. The heavy slugs fired by stub guns possess excellent stopping power against unarmored targets, making them effective weapons for close-quarters combat in the cramped confines of hab blocks and industrial facilities. Gang members often customize their stub guns with filed sights, modified grips carved from scavenged materials, or decorative elements that reflect their personal identity and gang affiliation. The simplicity of stub gun mechanisms allows even novice armorers to perform basic repairs and modifications using salvaged parts from multiple weapons. Chainswords serve as both practical weapons and symbols of gang status, their distinctive growling motors and whirring teeth creating psychological effects that often prove as valuable as their cutting capability. These weapons incorporate industrial cutting chains powered by compact motors, their design drawing from the chainsaw tools used throughout Imperial manufacturing facilities. Gang armorers modify chainswords with longer guide bars, reinforced housings, and improved fuel systems that extend operational time between refueling. The maintenance requirements of chainswords create ongoing logistical challenges, as their motors require lubricants, fuel, and replacement parts that must be acquired through trade or theft from industrial facilities. The construction of improvised weapons from industrial materials represents a crucial survival skill that distinguishes experienced gang members from desperate scavengers. Pipe bombs fabricated from industrial containers, chemical explosives, and scavenged detonators provide gangs with area effect weapons capable of destroying enemy fortifications or creating diversions during tactical operations. The manufacture of these devices requires knowledge of chemical properties, timing mechanisms, and safety procedures that prevent accidental detonations during storage or transport. Gang bomb makers often specialize in specific types of explosives based on the industrial materials available in their territory and their personal expertise with different chemical compounds. Flame weapons constructed from industrial equipment provide gangs with psychological and tactical advantages in close-quarters combat, their terrifying effects often causing enemy fighters to break and run rather than face immolation. These weapons typically incorporate fuel tanks salvaged from industrial equipment, ignition systems adapted from welding tools, and delivery mechanisms fashioned from pipe fittings and pressure vessels. The operation of improvised flame weapons requires careful attention to fuel mixture ratios, ignition timing, and safety protocols that prevent the operator from becoming a victim of their own weapon. Gang flame weapons specialists develop techniques for maximizing fuel efficiency while creating the most intimidating visual and auditory effects. Electro weapons fashioned from power tools and industrial equipment exploit the abundant electrical systems that power Hive City operations, their stunning effects providing non-lethal options for capturing enemies or subduing targets for interrogation. These weapons typically incorporate high-voltage transformers, capacitor banks, and delivery mechanisms that can incapacitate targets through electrical shock without causing permanent injury. The construction of effective electro weapons requires understanding of electrical principles, insulation techniques, and safety measures that protect the operator from accidental electrocution. Gang electro weapon specialists often maintain multiple devices with different voltage levels and delivery methods to address various tactical situations. Access to military-grade equipment through black market channels represents a crucial factor in gang power dynamics, as organizations with connections to these networks can acquire weapons and equipment that provide decisive advantages over rivals limited to improvised gear. Black market dealers operate sophisticated networks that connect gang territories to corrupt imperial officials, rogue traders, and criminal organizations operating throughout the Hive and beyond. These dealers typically specialize in specific types of equipment based on their connections and expertise, with some focusing on small arms and ammunition, while others deal in heavy weapons, vehicles, or specialized equipment. The relationship between gangs and black market dealers requires careful management of trust, payment terms, and operational security to prevent rival gangs from disrupting supply chains or Imperial authorities from tracing weapons back to their sources. Gang leaders often maintain relationships with multiple dealers to ensure continuity of supply, while avoiding dependence on any single source that might become compromised or unreliable. The negotiation of weapons purchases involves complex considerations of price, quality, delivery schedules, and the ongoing support services necessary for maintaining sophisticated equipment in the harsh underhive environment. Corrupt planetary defense force contacts provide another avenue for acquiring military equipment, as PDF units often possess surplus weapons, ammunition, and equipment that can be diverted to gang use through carefully orchestrated theft or unofficial sales. These relationships typically develop through personal connections between gang members and PDF personnel who share common backgrounds, family ties, or mutual interests in profitable ventures. The cultivation of PDF contacts requires patience, discretion, and the ability to provide services or information that PDF personnel value enough to risk their careers and freedom. PDF equipment acquisition operations often involve complex schemes that disguise theft as administrative errors, training accidents, or equipment failures that require replacement. Gang members with PDF connections might arrange for weapons to be reported as destroyed during training exercises, lost during transport operations, or damaged beyond repair during maintenance activities. The success of these operations depends on the gang's ability to provide plausible explanations for equipment disappearances while maintaining the operational security necessary to prevent discovery by PDF internal security investigations. Raided Imperial supply convoys represent high-risk, high-reward opportunities for gangs seeking to acquire large quantities of military equipment in single operations. These raids require extensive intelligence gathering to identify valuable targets, detailed planning to overcome convoy security measures, and the tactical capabilities necessary to execute successful attacks against trained Imperial personnel. The intelligence requirements for convoy raids include information about cargo contents, security arrangements, route planning, and timing that allows gangs to position their forces for maximum effectiveness while minimizing exposure to Imperial retaliation. Convoy raid operations typically involve multiple phases including reconnaissance, positioning, assault, and extraction that must be coordinated precisely to achieve success while avoiding catastrophic losses. Reconnaissance teams identify optimal ambush locations, where terrain features provide concealment and fields of fire, while limiting the convoy's ability to maneuver or call for reinforcement. Positioning phases involve moving assault teams into attack positions, while maintaining operational security and avoiding detection by Imperial security forces or rival gangs that might interfere with the operation. The assault phase of convoy raids requires overwhelming firepower and tactical coordination to neutralize convoy security forces before they can mount effective resistance or call for reinforcement. Gang assault teams typically focus their initial attacks on communication equipment, vehicle engines, and command personnel to prevent organized resistance while creating confusion that facilitates the rapid extraction of valuable cargo. The success of convoy assaults often depends on achieving complete surprise and maintaining the initiative throughout the engagement to prevent Imperial forces from implementing their training and superior equipment advantages. Gang workshops serve as the technological heart of gang operations, providing the manufacturing capabilities necessary for maintaining weapons, producing ammunition, and creating the specialized equipment that gives successful gangs advantages over their rivals. These facilities typically occupy abandoned industrial spaces, repurposed hab blocks, or concealed locations within gang territory, where the noise and emissions from manufacturing activities will not attract unwanted attention from Imperial authorities or rival gangs. The establishment of effective workshops requires significant investment in tools, raw materials, and skilled personnel who possess the technical knowledge necessary for complex manufacturing operations. Workshop security represents a critical concern for gang operations, as these facilities contain valuable equipment and materials that rival gangs might attempt to capture or destroy. Gang workshops typically incorporate multiple layers of security, including concealed entrances, defensive positions, and alarm systems that can alert gang forces to intrusion attempts. The most sophisticated workshops include automated defense systems, surveillance equipment, and communication networks that allow workshop personnel to coordinate with gang military forces during emergency situations. Tech adepts within gang organizations possess the specialized knowledge necessary for maintaining and modifying the complex weapons and equipment that distinguish successful gangs from mere criminal mobs. These individuals often possess training fragments inherited from legitimate imperial technical education, self-taught expertise developed through years of experimentation, or knowledge acquired through contact with Adeptus Mechanicus personnel who operate in the Hive's industrial sectors. The technical skills of gang tech adepts typically focus on practical applications rather than theoretical understanding, emphasizing the ability to repair, modify, and improve existing equipment rather than designing entirely new technologies. The relationship between tech adepts and gang leadership requires careful management of technical autonomy and operational security, as these specialists often possess knowledge that could be valuable to rival gangs or imperial authorities. Gang leaders must provide tech adepts with the resources and protection necessary for their work, while ensuring that their technical activities support gang objectives rather than personal projects that might compromise operational security. The most effective gang tech adepts develop specializations that align with their gang's tactical doctrine and territorial requirements while maintaining the flexibility to adapt their skills to changing circumstances. Weapon modification represents one of the most important functions performed by gang tech adepts, as the ability to customize equipment for specific tactical situations provides significant advantages in the diverse combat environments that characterize underhive warfare. Common modifications include barrel extensions that improve accuracy and range, magazine modifications that increase ammunition capacity, and sight systems that enhance target acquisition in low-light conditions. More sophisticated modifications might incorporate electronic components, specialized ammunition types, or integrated accessories that combine multiple functions in single weapon systems. The creation of unique weapon variants through modification and combination of existing systems allows gangs to field equipment that cannot be easily countered by rivals who lack similar technical capabilities. These unique weapons often incorporate components from multiple sources, combining imperial military hardware with industrial equipment and improvised elements to create systems that exceed the capabilities of their individual components. The development of successful weapon variants requires extensive testing and refinement to ensure reliability under combat conditions, while maximizing the tactical advantages provided by custom features. Jury-rigged weapon combinations represent the ultimate expression of gang technical creativity, as skilled tech adepts combine disparate components into integrated systems that provide capabilities unavailable from standard equipment. These combinations might include weapons that fire multiple ammunition types, integrated tool weapon systems that serve both combat and utility functions, or modular designs that allow rapid reconfiguration for different tactical situations. The success of jury-rigged combinations depends on the tech adept's ability to understand the operational principles of different systems while developing innovative solutions to integration challenges. The significance of rare weapons as status symbols within gang hierarchies creates powerful incentives for organizations to acquire and maintain equipment that demonstrates their power and technical sophistication. Plasma guns represent the pinnacle of personal weapons technology available to gang forces, their devastating firepower and advanced technology making them symbols of ultimate authority within gang hierarchies. The acquisition of plasma weapons requires enormous resources and connections, as these devices are rarely available through normal black market channels and typically must be stolen from imperial military units or acquired through corrupt officials with access to restricted armories. Plasma gun maintenance presents ongoing challenges for gang tech adepts, as these weapons incorporate complex technologies that require specialized knowledge, rare materials, and precision manufacturing techniques to maintain operational effectiveness. The hydrogen fuel cells that power plasma weapons must be replaced regularly and require specific storage conditions to prevent degradation or explosive failure. The magnetic containment systems that shape and direct plasma charges require periodic recalibration using diagnostic equipment that gangs must acquire through theft or black market purchases from corrupt Adeptus Mechanicus personnel. Power weapons occupy similar status positions within gang hierarchies, their energy fields and advanced materials representing technologies that few gangs can acquire or maintain effectively. Power swords, axes, and mauls provide their wielders with capabilities that can cut through armor and weapons that would stop conventional attacks, making them decisive advantages in personal combat situations. The power cells that energize these weapons require regular replacement and careful maintenance to prevent field fluctuations that could damage the weapon or injure its user. The lengths that gangs will pursue to acquire rare weapons often involve complex operations that span multiple gang territories and require coordination between different criminal organizations. Intelligence gathering operations might spend months tracking the movement of valuable weapons through Imperial supply chains, identifying vulnerabilities in security arrangements, and developing the contacts necessary to execute successful acquisition operations. These efforts often require significant investment of gang resources and personnel, while accepting substantial risks of detection and retaliation by Imperial authorities. Theft operations targeting rare weapons typically involve elaborate schemes that exploit weaknesses in Imperial security procedures while maintaining operational security that prevents the theft from being traced back to the responsible gang. These operations might involve the corruption of security personnel, the creation of diversions that draw attention away from the actual theft, or the use of inside information to identify opportunities when valuable weapons are vulnerable to acquisition. The success of rare weapon theft operations often depends on the gang's ability to move quickly and decisively while avoiding the massive security responses that such thefts typically provoke. The underground networks that facilitate rare weapon acquisition operate through complex chains of intermediaries that insulate buyers and sellers from direct contact, while providing the security and reliability necessary for high-value transactions. These networks often span multiple hive levels and may include connections to off-world criminal organizations, corrupt Imperial officials, and rogue traders who operate outside normal Imperial oversight. The establishment of reliable connections within these networks requires years of relationship building and the demonstration of trustworthiness through successful completion of smaller transactions. Competition between gangs for rare weapon acquisition creates ongoing conflicts that extend beyond simple territorial disputes to encompass intelligence warfare, economic competition, and diplomatic maneuvering designed to gain advantages in the acquisition of valuable equipment. Gangs often attempt to disrupt rival acquisition operations through sabotage, misinformation campaigns, or direct interference with supply chains and dealer networks. The intensity of this competition reflects the decisive advantages that rare weapons provide in gang warfare and the recognition that access to advanced equipment often determines the outcome of major territorial conflicts. The industrial powerhouse of Necromunda stands as the archetypal example of Hive Gang culture, its massive foundries and chemical processing plants providing the backdrop for some of the most well-documented gang organizations in Imperial space. House Goliath emerged from the Forge gangs that operated the heavy industrial complexes in Necromunda's lower reaches, their members developing the enhanced physiques and chemical tolerance necessary for working in the toxic foundries that produce weapons and equipment for the Imperial war machine. The Goliath gangs affiliated with this house maintain direct connections to legitimate manufacturing operations, allowing them access to industrial-grade equipment and the raw materials necessary for producing their distinctive combat stimulants. Goliath territory typically encompasses entire foundry complexes, where massive furnaces operate continuously, their hellish glow casting dancing shadows across the muscled forms of gang members who move through the industrial landscape with practiced ease. These gangers display the characteristic signs of long-term exposure to industrial chemicals, enlarged frames, pronounced musculature, and the distinctive pallor that comes from working in environments where natural light never penetrates. Their workshops occupy sections of active manufacturing facilities, where the constant noise of heavy machinery provides cover for weapons testing and the production of combat drugs that enhance their already formidable physical capabilities. The combat stimulants produced by Goliath gangs represent sophisticated chemical engineering that builds upon their intimate knowledge of industrial processes and chemical synthesis. These drugs typically enhance strength, pain tolerance, and aggression, while providing temporary resistance to the toxic environments that characterize their territorial holdings. Goliath chem dealers develop specialized formulations that account for individual body chemistry, combat role requirements, and the specific environmental hazards present in different operational areas. The most potent combat stimulants require rare chemical compounds that must be extracted from industrial waste streams or acquired through raids on legitimate pharmaceutical facilities. Heavy weapons preferences among Goliath gangs reflect both their physical capabilities and their access to industrial manufacturing equipment that can be modified for military applications. Plasma cannons fashioned from industrial cutting tools provide devastating firepower that can breach the heaviest fortifications while creating the spectacular visual effects that reinforce Goliath's psychological warfare tactics. Heavy stubbers constructed from manufacturing equipment deliver sustained automatic fire that can suppress enemy positions, while the distinctive sound of their operation announces Goliath presence throughout their territory. Missile launchers improvised from industrial equipment provide indirect fire capabilities that allow Goliath forces to engage enemies at extended ranges while remaining protected within their fortified industrial complexes. The relationship between Goliath gangs and House Goliath creates complex dynamics that blur the boundaries between legitimate business operations and criminal enterprises. Gang leaders often hold positions within the house hierarchy that provide them with access to industrial resources, technical expertise, and political connections that extend far beyond their immediate territorial holdings. These relationships allow successful gang leaders to transition into legitimate business roles while maintaining their criminal networks as sources of additional revenue and operational security. Escher gangs represent the antithesis of Goliath industrial culture, their matriarchal organizations emphasizing speed, agility, and the sophisticated chemical knowledge that allows them to thrive in the complex three-dimensional environments of hive infrastructure. These gangs trace their origins to the chemical guilds and pharmaceutical collectives that operated the complex processing facilities responsible for producing the vast array of drugs, toxins, and chemical compounds necessary for hive city operations. The matriarchal structure of Escher society reflects both practical considerations about chemical knowledge transmission and cultural traditions that emphasize the role of women as guardians of specialized technical expertise. Escher territories exploit the vertical nature of hive architecture through their control of maintenance tunnels, ventilation systems, and the complex networks of pipes and conduits that connect different hive levels. These three-dimensional territories appear smaller on traditional maps, but provide Escher gangs with unparalleled mobility and the ability to strike anywhere within their operational area before disappearing into passages that rival gangs cannot effectively pursue. Gang members develop extraordinary climbing abilities and spatial awareness that allow them to navigate these environments in complete darkness while carrying full combat loads and chemical equipment. The chemical expertise that distinguishes Escher gangs encompasses both the production of combat drugs and the creation of exotic toxins, acids, and corrosive compounds that serve as weapons in their own right. Escher chem labs occupy concealed locations within their territorial networks, where skilled chemists develop new formulations using equipment salvaged from legitimate pharmaceutical facilities and raw materials acquired through complex supply chains that span multiple gang territories. These laboratories produce everything from combat stimulants that enhance reflexes and pain tolerance to exotic poisons that can be deployed through aerosol delivery systems or coating weapons for delayed effect attacks. Combat drug development within Escher gangs focuses on substances that enhance the speed and agility advantages that form the foundation of their tactical doctrine. Stimulants that accelerate reaction times allow Escher fighters to exploit brief windows of opportunity during fast-moving engagements, while maintaining the precision necessary for effective use of their preferred weapons. Endurance enhancers provide the sustained energy necessary for extended operations in the challenging three-dimensional environments where Escher gangs conduct most of their activities. Pain suppressants allow injured fighters to continue operating effectively while seeking medical attention or extraction from hostile territory. The reputation for speed and agility that characterizes Escher combat operations extends beyond simple physical capabilities to encompass tactical mobility, rapid decision-making, and the ability to adapt quickly to changing battlefield conditions. Escher assault teams typically operate in small units that can move through complex terrain while maintaining communication and coordination with other elements of their force. These teams excel at hit and run tactics that exploit their superior knowledge of local terrain while avoiding the sustained engagements where enemy advantages in firepower or numbers might prove decisive. Van Saar gangs represent the technological elite of underhive society, their organizations built around the preservation and application of technical knowledge that often dates back to the dark age of technology. These gangs emerged from the technical guilds and engineering collectives that maintain the complex technological systems necessary for Hive city operations, their members developing expertise in electronics, mechanics, and the arcane principles that govern archaeotech devices. The technological superiority that defines Van Saar culture creates both opportunities and vulnerabilities, as their advanced equipment provides decisive advantages while making them targets for rival gangs and imperial authorities who view unauthorized technology with suspicion. Van Saar territories cluster around locations that provide access to power sources, data networks, and the technological infrastructure necessary for their sophisticated operations. These areas often include abandoned research facilities, decommissioned manufacturing complexes, and sections of the Hive's technical infrastructure where Van Saar gangs can tap into power grids and communication networks while maintaining the security necessary for their sensitive activities. Gang workshops occupy carefully selected locations where electromagnetic shielding and physical security measures protect valuable equipment and research materials from theft or sabotage. Advanced energy weapons represent the most visible manifestation of Van Saar technological capabilities. Their Law's weapons, plasma guns, and exotic energy projectors providing firepower that exceeds anything available to rival gangs through conventional acquisition methods. These weapons typically incorporate modifications and improvements that enhance their effectiveness beyond standard Imperial specifications, while maintaining the reliability necessary for extended operations in harsh underhive environments. Van Saar weaponsmiths develop specialized power cells, focusing crystals, and targeting systems that maximize the effectiveness of energy weapons while minimizing the logistical burden of ammunition supply. The protective equipment employed by Van Saar gangs reflects their understanding of both conventional ballistic threats and the exotic dangers present in technologically complex environments. Their armor systems typically incorporate energy shielding, environmental protection, and sensor integration that provides capabilities far exceeding simple ballistic protection. Void suits adapted for underhive operations protect Van Saar operatives from toxic atmospheres, radiation exposure, and the electromagnetic effects generated by their own advanced equipment. Helmet systems integrate targeting displays, communication equipment, and sensor arrays that provide situational awareness advantages during complex tactical operations. Vansar Technological Research focuses on practical applications that provide immediate advantages in gang warfare, while building toward long-term objectives of recovering and understanding Dark Age technology. Research teams work to reverse engineer archaeotech fragments, develop new applications for existing technology, and create hybrid systems that combine Imperial standard equipment with advanced components. These research efforts require access to rare materials, specialized manufacturing equipment, and the technical expertise necessary to work with technologies that Imperial doctrine considers dangerous or heretical. Regional variations in gang culture reflect the diverse environmental conditions, industrial focuses, and cultural traditions that characterize different hive worlds throughout the Imperium. The corpse guilds that operate on death worlds and heavily polluted industrial planets represent specialized adaptations to environments where conventional gang activities would be impossible due to extreme mortality rates and environmental hazards. These organizations typically focus on body disposal, grave robbing, and the harvesting of useful materials from the constant stream of casualties that characterize life on the most dangerous Imperial worlds. Corpse guild operations require specialized knowledge of decomposition processes, disease prevention, and the identification of valuable materials that can be recovered from deceased individuals. Guild members develop resistance to the diseases and toxins associated with handling large numbers of corpses, while maintaining the organizational discipline necessary for coordinating activities across multiple collection and processing sites. These guilds often maintain relationships with legitimate authorities who require discreet disposal services for individuals whose deaths might prove politically embarrassing or operationally sensitive. The economic model of corpse guilds encompasses both the disposal services they provide to legitimate authorities and the recovery of valuable materials from processed remains. Cybernetic implants, precious metals from dental work, and useful organs for black market medical procedures provide revenue streams that support guild operations while creating incentives for expansion into new territories. Guild processing facilities typically occupy locations where the smell and health hazards associated with their operations will not attract unwanted attention from rival gangs or Imperial authorities. Rad gangs flourish in the heavily irradiated industrial sectors that characterize many hive worlds where nuclear power generation, radioactive material processing, or the aftermath of ancient conflicts have created environments that normal humans cannot survive. These gangs typically consist of individuals who have developed natural or artificial resistance to radiation exposure, while maintaining the organizational capabilities necessary for effective gang operations. Rad gang members often display the physical mutations associated with long-term radiation exposure, while developing cultural practices that incorporate their unique environmental adaptations. Radiation resistance within rad gangs typically develops through a combination of genetic adaptation, technological augmentation, and chemical treatments that provide protection against the high-energy particles and electromagnetic radiation present in their territorial holdings. Gang members often wear radiation detection equipment and protective gear that allows them to operate safely in areas where unprotected exposure would prove fatal within minutes. The most successful rad gangs develop expertise in radiation shielding, decontamination procedures, and the identification of radioactive materials that can be harvested for use in weapons or sold to other organizations. Rad gang territories often encompass valuable industrial facilities that other gangs cannot effectively occupy due to radiation hazards, providing these organizations with access to advanced manufacturing equipment, rare materials, and strategic positions that would otherwise be contested by multiple rival groups. Nuclear power plants, radioactive waste processing facilities, and the sites of ancient atomic weapons testing provide both resources and defensive advantages for gangs capable of operating in these environments. The radiation hazards that protect these territories also create logistical challenges for rad gangs, as they must maintain supply lines and communication networks that account for the health risks associated with extended operations in contaminated areas. The weapons and equipment employed by rad gangs often incorporate radioactive materials and radiation-based effects that provide unique tactical advantages while creating additional hazards for both users and targets. Radioactive ammunition creates wounds that resist healing while causing long-term health effects in survivors, making these weapons particularly effective for psychological warfare and area denial operations. Radiation projectors fashioned from industrial equipment can contaminate areas or equipment, creating barriers that persist long after the weapons themselves have been withdrawn from the battlefield. Industrial sector gangs across different hive worlds adapt their organizations and tactics to the specific manufacturing focuses and environmental conditions that characterize their operational areas. Chemical processing facilities create opportunities for gangs specializing in toxic warfare and pharmaceutical production, while heavy manufacturing complexes favor organizations with the technical expertise and physical capabilities necessary for operating complex industrial equipment. Mining operations attract gangs that develop expertise in explosives, excavation equipment, and the harsh underground environments where valuable materials are extracted from planetary crusts. The diversity of industrial environments creates corresponding variations in gang culture, equipment preferences, and territorial strategies that reflect the specific challenges and opportunities present in different operational areas. Gangs operating in chemical processing areas develop expertise in hazardous material handling and protective equipment, while those in heavy manufacturing focus on mechanical systems and large-scale production processes. Mining gangs specialize in underground warfare and the use of industrial explosives, while maintaining the logistical capabilities necessary for extended operations in remote locations far from hive population centers. The narrow confines and vertical complexity of hive city architecture create unique tactical challenges that have shaped gang warfare doctrine over millennia of conflict in the underhive depths. Building-to-building fighting represents the most common form of gang combat, as territorial disputes typically involve the capture and defense of specific hab blocks, industrial facilities, or commercial districts that provide strategic value or economic resources. These engagements require specialized techniques that account for the cramped spaces, limited visibility, and structural hazards that characterize most underhive construction. Gang assault teams typically operate in small units of 3 to 5 fighters who can move through doorways and narrow corridors while maintaining mutual support and fire discipline. The point fighter carries close combat weapons such as chainswords or combat knives alongside a compact ranged weapon like an auto pistol or stub gun that can be employed effectively in confined spaces. Support fighters provide covering fire with shotguns or auto guns while carrying demolition charges or specialized equipment needed for breaching reinforced barriers. The team leader maintains communication with other units while coordinating the systematic clearing of rooms and corridors that characterizes successful building assault operations. Breaching techniques employed by experienced gang fighters exploit both the structural weaknesses inherent in ancient hive construction and the improvised fortifications that defending gangs typically establish in contested buildings. Explosive charges placed against load-bearing walls can create new entry points while simultaneously weakening the structural integrity of defensive positions. Acid compounds developed by Escher gangs dissolve metal barriers and door locks without the noise and debris associated with explosive breaching. Plasma cutters and industrial tools adapted for military use provide precise cutting capabilities that allow assault teams to create firing ports or escape routes through walls and floors. The vertical nature of hive architecture requires gang fighters to master three-dimensional movement techniques that allow them to exploit stairwells, elevator shafts, and maintenance passages while avoiding the killing zones that defenders establish at obvious choke points. Climbing equipment salvaged from industrial operations enables assault teams to approach target buildings through exterior walls, ventilation systems, or the complex networks of pipes and conduits that connect different structures. Rappelling techniques allow fighters to descend from upper levels while maintaining weapons readiness and the ability to provide covering fire for other team members. Defensive preparations within contested buildings focus on creating overlapping fields of fire while maintaining escape routes that allow defenders to withdraw to secondary positions if primary defenses are compromised. Gang defenders typically establish firing positions that exploit natural cover while providing clear lines of sight to likely approach routes. Barricades constructed from furniture, industrial equipment, and salvaged materials create additional protection while channeling attackers into predetermined kill zones. Booby traps and improvised explosive devices placed at entry points and along likely advance routes can eliminate assault team members while alerting defenders to enemy movements. Ambush tactics represent a fundamental component of gang warfare doctrine, as the complex terrain and limited visibility present in most underhive environments provide numerous opportunities for surprise attacks against enemy patrols, supply convoys, and reconnaissance teams. Successful ambush operations require detailed intelligence about enemy movement patterns, careful selection of engagement sites that provide tactical advantages, and coordination between multiple elements to ensure that targets cannot escape or call for reinforcement. Gang ambush teams typically establish positions that provide concealment from enemy observation while offering clear fields of fire and multiple escape routes that can be used if the engagement develops unfavorably. Natural choke points such as tunnel intersections, bridge crossings, or narrow passages between buildings provide ideal ambush sites where enemy forces cannot easily maneuver to avoid concentrated fire. Industrial hazards such as toxic waste pools, unstable structures, or active machinery can be incorporated into ambush plans to create additional threats that complicate enemy response options. The timing of ambush attacks requires precise coordination between observation teams that track enemy movements and assault elements positioned to deliver maximum firepower during the brief window when targets are most vulnerable. Communication systems using hand signals, coded Vox transmissions, or mechanical devices such as bells or drums allow ambush commanders to coordinate the simultaneous engagement of multiple targets while maintaining operational security. The initial moments of an ambush typically determine its success or failure, as enemy forces that survive the opening volleys may be able to organize effective counterattacks or call for reinforcement from nearby units. Industrial terrain throughout the underhive provides gang fighters with numerous opportunities to gain tactical advantages through superior knowledge of local manufacturing processes, environmental hazards, and the operational characteristics of heavy machinery. Gang members who work in legitimate industrial positions often possess detailed understanding of factory layouts, equipment operation schedules, and safety procedures that can be exploited during combat operations. This insider knowledge allows gangs to predict enemy movements, identify vulnerable positions, and coordinate attacks that exploit the unique characteristics of specific industrial environments. Manufacturing equipment can be weaponized through modification or tactical employment that turns industrial tools into instruments of warfare. Overhead cranes and conveyor systems provide elevated firing positions and movement routes that allow gang fighters to engage enemies from unexpected angles while remaining protected from return fire. Industrial cutting tools such as plasma torches and laser cutters can be deployed as weapons that bypass conventional armor protection while creating breaches in enemy fortifications. Chemical processing equipment can be sabotaged or modified to create toxic clouds, corrosive sprays, or explosive hazards that deny areas to enemy forces. Power systems that supply industrial facilities present both opportunities and vulnerabilities that experienced gang fighters learn to exploit during combat operations. Electrical distribution networks can be overloaded to create fires, explosions, or power failures that disrupt enemy operations while providing cover for friendly movements. Backup power systems and emergency lighting can be disabled to create darkness that favors gangs with superior night vision equipment or knowledge of local terrain. Steam pipes and pressure vessels can be ruptured to create scalding clouds that block visibility while inflicting casualties on enemy personnel caught in the affected areas. The role of reconnaissance in gang warfare extends far beyond simple observation to encompass sophisticated intelligence, gathering operations that provide strategic and tactical advantages through detailed knowledge of enemy capabilities, intentions, and vulnerabilities. Network informants represent the foundation of most gang intelligence operations, as these individuals provide ongoing access to information about rival gang activities, Imperial security operations, and economic opportunities throughout the Hive city. The cultivation and management of informant networks requires careful attention to operational security, compensation systems, and the protection of sources from discovery by enemy counterintelligence efforts. Informant recruitment typically targets individuals who possess access to valuable information while facing personal circumstances that make them vulnerable to gang pressure or willing to cooperate in exchange for protection or financial compensation. Workers in rival gang territories can provide intelligence about defensive preparations, leadership disputes, and resource shortages that create opportunities for exploitation. Merchants and traders who operate across multiple gang territories observe patterns of activity, equipment purchases, and personnel movements that reveal enemy intentions and capabilities. Corrupt officials within Imperial administrative structures provide access to information about security operations, legal proceedings, and policy changes that affect gang operations. The security of informant networks requires sophisticated communication procedures and operational protocols that protect sources from discovery while ensuring the reliability and timeliness of intelligence reporting. Dead drops using concealed locations allow informants to pass information without direct contact with gang personnel, reducing the risk of exposure through surveillance or interrogation. Coded messages transmitted through legitimate communication channels, such as commercial Vox networks or public information systems, provide secure methods for intelligence transmission that appear routine to casual observation. Multiple verification sources help confirm the accuracy of intelligence reports while identifying potential disinformation or compromised sources. Captured Vox communications provide another crucial source of intelligence that allows gangs to monitor enemy activities in real time while gathering strategic information about planned operations and resource allocation decisions. The interception of enemy communications requires technical expertise in radio equipment operation, signal processing, and cryptographic analysis that allows gang intelligence specialists to extract useful information from encrypted or coded transmissions. Vansar gangs typically possess the greatest capabilities in communications intelligence due to their technical expertise and access to advanced electronic equipment. Communication interception equipment ranges from simple radio receivers that monitor unencrypted transmissions to sophisticated signal processing systems that can break encryption codes and identify transmission sources. Gang technical specialists often modify commercial communications equipment to extend reception ranges, improve signal processing capabilities, or add recording functions that allow detailed analysis of intercepted transmissions. The most advanced interception systems incorporate direction-finding capabilities that can locate enemy transmitters, while automated analysis software identifies patterns and keywords that indicate important intelligence. Surveillance operations targeting rival gang movements require careful coordination between observation teams, communication networks, and analytical capabilities that can process large volumes of information to identify patterns and predict enemy activities. Physical surveillance teams positioned at key observation points monitor enemy patrol routes, supply movements, and the activities of important personnel while maintaining the concealment necessary to avoid detection. These teams typically operate in shifts that provide continuous coverage while allowing personnel to rest and resupply without creating gaps in surveillance coverage. Surveillance equipment employed by gang intelligence operations includes everything from simple binoculars and telescopes to sophisticated electronic sensors that can detect movement, heat signatures, or electromagnetic emissions from enemy equipment. Night vision devices salvaged from military sources or acquired through black market channels allow surveillance teams to maintain observation during low light conditions when enemy activities may be most revealing. Motion detectors and proximity sensors can be deployed to monitor specific locations or routes while providing automated alerts when enemy personnel enter surveilled areas. Combined arms approaches in gang warfare integrate different types of combat units and supporting elements to achieve tactical objectives that exceed the capabilities of individual unit types operating independently. Gang vehicles provide mobility, firepower, and protection that allow assault forces to close with enemy positions, while maintaining the speed and flexibility necessary for rapid exploitation of tactical opportunities. These vehicles typically consist of modified civilian transports, captured military equipment, or improvised fighting vehicles constructed from industrial materials and salvaged components. Vehicle modifications for gang warfare focus on enhancing protection, firepower, and reliability while maintaining the mobility characteristics necessary for operations in the complex terrain that characterizes most underhive environments. Armor plating welded to civilian vehicles provides protection against small arms fire, while gun mounts allow the installation of heavy weapons that exceed the firepower available to infantry units. Engine modifications improve acceleration and top speed, while suspension upgrades enhance off-road performance and the ability to traverse rough terrain or debris-filled areas. Heavy weapons teams provide fire support capabilities that allow gang forces to suppress enemy positions, destroy fortifications, and engage targets at ranges that exceed the effective engagement distances of personal weapons. These teams typically consist of weapon operators, ammunition bearers, and spotters who coordinate their activities to maximize the effectiveness of area weapons such as heavy stubbers, auto cannons, or missile launchers. The deployment and employment of heavy weapons requires careful planning to ensure adequate ammunition supply, protection from enemy counter fire, and communication with supported units. Coordinated infantry assaults integrate the capabilities of different specialist units to achieve tactical objectives through synchronized attacks that exploit enemy vulnerabilities while minimizing friendly casualties. Assault teams equipped for close combat provide the capability to clear enemy positions and secure objectives, while support teams provide covering fire and suppress enemy defensive positions. Demolition specialists breach enemy fortifications and eliminate specific targets, while medical personnel provide treatment for casualties and maintain unit effectiveness during extended operations. The coordination of combined arms operations requires sophisticated command and control capabilities that allow gang leaders to synchronize the activities of different unit types while adapting to changing tactical situations during combat operations. Communication systems must provide reliable contact between different elements while maintaining operational security that prevents enemy interception of tactical information. Command posts typically occupy positions that provide good visibility of the battlefield while remaining protected from enemy observation and direct fire. Psychological warfare represents a crucial component of gang combat doctrine that can achieve strategic objectives without the casualties and resource expenditure associated with direct military confrontation. Intimidation displays serve multiple purposes in gang warfare, as they demonstrate organizational power while demoralizing enemy forces and building reputation among neutral parties who might become allies or enemies depending on their assessment of gang capabilities. The staging of intimidation displays requires careful attention to audience, timing, and symbolic content that conveys specific messages about gang power and intentions. Public executions of captured enemies demonstrate the consequences of opposing gang interests, while establishing the gang's willingness to use extreme violence in pursuit of their objectives. The destruction of enemy property or symbolic targets shows the gang's capability to strike at will while creating fear among enemy supporters and potential recruits. Displays of advanced weapons, large numbers of fighters, or sophisticated equipment demonstrate capabilities that may deter challenges from rival organizations. The treatment of prisoners creates opportunities for intelligence gathering while serving psychological warfare objectives that can influence enemy morale and decision-making. Interrogation techniques employed by gang intelligence specialists range from simple questioning to sophisticated psychological manipulation that exploits personal fears, family loyalties, or ideological commitments to extract useful information. The information obtained through prisoner interrogation provides tactical intelligence about enemy positions and plans while revealing strategic information about leadership disputes, resource shortages, or alliance relationships. Prisoner exchanges between rival gangs serve diplomatic functions that can reduce tensions while demonstrating mutual respect and the possibility of negotiated solutions to territorial disputes. These exchanges typically involve careful negotiation of terms that ensure fair treatment for exchanged personnel while providing face-saving opportunities for both parties. The successful completion of prisoner exchanges can establish precedents for future cooperation while building trust between gang leaders who may need to work together against common threats. The use of reputation as a strategic weapon allows successful gangs to achieve objectives through the threat of violence rather than its actual application, as enemies who understand the gang's capabilities and willingness to use extreme force may choose to avoid conflicts rather than face the consequences of resistance. Reputation management requires consistent demonstration of capability and resolve while maintaining the credibility necessary for threats to influence enemy behavior. Gang leaders who develop reputations for keeping their word, whether in promises or threats, gain advantages in negotiations and conflicts that extend far beyond their immediate military capabilities. Reputation building through successful operations creates cumulative effects that enhance gang power while reducing the resources necessary for maintaining territorial control and achieving strategic objectives. Successful raids, victories in territorial conflicts, and the completion of difficult missions contribute to gang reputation, while demonstrating capabilities that potential enemies must consider when planning their own operations. The most successful gang leaders understand that reputation represents a form of power that can be accumulated through consistent performance, while being lost through failures or inconsistent behavior that undermines credibility. The economic foundation of gang power rests upon the systematic production and distribution of chemical substances that range from combat enhancement drugs to recreational narcotics, each serving distinct markets within the complex social hierarchy of hive cities. Drug manufacturing operations typically occupy concealed laboratories hidden within gang territories, where skilled chemists work with equipment salvaged from legitimate pharmaceutical facilities and raw materials acquired through complex supply chains that span multiple hive levels. These facilities must maintain strict operational security to prevent discovery by rival gangs seeking to capture valuable production capabilities or imperial authorities conducting anti-narcotics sweeps through suspected gang territories. Combat stimulants represent the most profitable and strategically important category of gang pharmaceutical production, as these substances provide immediate tactical advantages while generating revenue from military personnel, gang fighters, and civilians facing dangerous working conditions. Frenzon remains the most widely produced combat stimulant across gang territories throughout the Imperium, its chemical formula having been reverse-engineered from military supplies and adapted for production using readily available industrial chemicals. The drug's ability to suppress pain sensation while enhancing aggression makes it invaluable for gang warfare, though its addictive properties and severe withdrawal symptoms create ongoing demand that supports long-term distribution networks. Gang chemists develop specialized variants of combat stimulants that account for different operational requirements and user physiology, creating product lines that serve specific tactical roles while maximizing market penetration. Strength enhancers designed for heavy weapons specialists incorporate anabolic compounds that temporarily increase muscle mass and endurance while providing the pain tolerance necessary for operating crew-served weapons during extended engagements. Reflexive stimulants favored by reconnaissance teams and vehicle operators enhance reaction times and visual acuity while maintaining the mental clarity necessary for complex tactical decision-making under extreme stress. The production process for combat stimulants requires access to controlled chemical precursors that gangs acquire through theft from legitimate facilities, corruption of supply chain personnel, or synthesis from more readily available industrial compounds. Gang laboratories typically maintain stockpiles of base chemicals that can be combined in different ratios to produce various stimulant types, allowing production flexibility while minimizing storage requirements for finished products that might be discovered during security sweeps. Quality control procedures developed by experienced gang chemists ensure product consistency while identifying contamination or degradation that could reduce effectiveness or cause harmful side effects. Recreational narcotics production serves different market segments that include middle hive workers seeking escape from industrial drudgery, wealthy spire dwellers pursuing exotic experiences, and underhive residents attempting to cope with the psychological stress of constant violence and deprivation. Obscura represents the most widely distributed recreational narcotic in Imperial hive cities, its production requiring relatively simple chemical processes that can be accomplished with basic laboratory equipment and readily available organic materials. Gang Obscura production typically focuses on purity enhancement and dosage standardization that commands premium prices while building customer loyalty through consistent product quality. Calma synthesis requires more sophisticated chemical knowledge and equipment due to its complex molecular structure and the precision necessary for achieving the euphoric effects that make it popular among wealthy consumers. Gang laboratories producing Calma typically occupy larger facilities with advanced distillation equipment, temperature control systems, and purification apparatus that can maintain the exacting conditions necessary for successful synthesis. The high profit margins associated with Calma distribution justify the additional investment in production capabilities, while creating incentives for gangs to expand their chemical expertise and equipment acquisition efforts. Slot production presents unique challenges due to the drug's extreme potency and the dangerous chemical processes required for its synthesis, which involve highly volatile compounds that can cause explosions or toxic releases if handled improperly. Gang chemists who specialize in slot production typically work in isolated laboratories with extensive safety equipment and emergency procedures designed to contain accidents that could expose surrounding areas to deadly chemical contamination. The drug's reputation for causing permanent psychological damage and violent behavior limits its market appeal, while creating opportunities for gangs willing to accept the risks associated with its production and distribution. Addiction-inducing substances represent a particularly insidious category of gang pharmaceutical production that focuses on creating long-term dependency relationships rather than providing immediate recreational or performance benefits. These compounds typically incorporate subtle chemical hooks that create physical or psychological dependence after limited exposure, ensuring ongoing demand while making it difficult for users to discontinue consumption without experiencing severe withdrawal symptoms. Gang chemists develop these substances by modifying legitimate pharmaceuticals or combining recreational drugs with dependency-enhancing additives that extend the duration and intensity of withdrawal effects. Distribution networks for gang-produced drugs operate through complex hierarchies of dealers, runners, and middlemen who insulate production facilities from law enforcement while ensuring reliable supply to end users across different hive levels. Street-level dealers typically operate from fixed locations, such as bars, gambling dens, or commercial establishments that provide cover for drug transactions, while offering security against robbery or interference from rival distribution networks. These dealers maintain limited inventories to minimize losses from theft or confiscation, while relying on regular resupply from higher-level distributors who control larger territories and customer bases. Regional distributors coordinate drug supply across multiple territories while managing relationships with production facilities, transportation networks, and the corrupt officials who provide protection from law enforcement activities. These individuals typically maintain sophisticated intelligence networks that monitor law enforcement activities, rival gang operations, and market demand fluctuations that affect pricing and distribution strategies. Regional distributors often diversify their operations across multiple drug types and customer segments to reduce vulnerability to market disruptions, while maximizing revenue from their territorial holdings. Transportation of drug shipments between production facilities and distribution points requires careful attention to security, concealment, and timing that minimizes exposure to law enforcement interdiction or theft by rival gangs. Gang transportation networks typically utilize multiple routes and vehicle types to avoid establishing predictable patterns that enemies can exploit for ambush or interdiction operations. Concealment techniques range from simple hidden compartments in civilian vehicles to sophisticated chemical masking agents that defeat detection equipment used by Imperial security forces during routine inspections. Weapons smuggling operations provide gangs with access to military-grade equipment, while generating revenue through sales to other criminal organizations, rebel movements, and occasionally Xenos traders who operate in the shadowy margins of Imperial space. These operations typically begin with the acquisition of weapons from corrupt military personnel, theft from Imperial armories, or interception of supply convoys transporting equipment between military installations. Gang weapons dealers develop expertise in identifying valuable targets while maintaining the operational security necessary to avoid detection by military intelligence services that monitor weapons trafficking activities. Imperial Guard equipment represents the most common category of weapons available through gang smuggling networks, as the massive scale of Imperial military operations creates numerous opportunities for weapons to be diverted from official supply chains. Gang contacts within Guard logistics units can arrange for weapons to be reported as lost during training exercises, destroyed in combat operations, or damaged beyond repair during maintenance activities. These diversions typically involve small quantities of personal weapons and ammunition that can be concealed easily while avoiding the inventory discrepancies that might trigger security investigations. Planetary Defense Force armories present different opportunities for weapons acquisition due to their more limited security measures and the local connections that gang members often maintain with PDF personnel through family relationships or shared community backgrounds. Gang weapons smugglers cultivate relationships with PDF personnel who face financial difficulties, disciplinary problems, or ideological conflicts with their military service that make them susceptible to recruitment as sources of weapons and equipment. These relationships often develop gradually through social contact and mutual favors before progressing to more serious criminal activities. Naval equipment acquisition requires more sophisticated operations due to the enhanced security measures that protect Imperial Navy installations and the specialized nature of shipboard weapon systems that may require modification for ground-based applications. Gang weapons dealers who specialize in naval equipment typically focus on personal weapons, small crew-served systems, and the advanced electronics that can be adapted for gang communication and surveillance operations. The acquisition of naval equipment often involves complex schemes that exploit shore leave activities, maintenance operations, or the transfer of personnel between different vessels and installations. Modification services provided by gang weapons dealers transform standard Imperial equipment into specialized systems that serve specific tactical requirements or circumvent legal restrictions that limit civilian access to military capabilities. These modifications might include the conversion of semi-automatic weapons to full automatic operation, the installation of advanced sighting systems that improve accuracy and target acquisition, or the integration of specialized ammunition types that enhance penetration or create specific wound effects. gang weaponsmiths develop expertise in specific weapon systems that allows them to perform reliable modifications while maintaining weapon safety and effectiveness. Quality control in weapons smuggling operations requires extensive testing and evaluation procedures that ensure modified or refurbished weapons function reliably under combat conditions, while meeting the performance expectations of customers who depend on these weapons for their survival. Gang testing facilities typically occupy remote locations where weapons can be fired safely while avoiding detection by security forces who might investigate unusual noise or activity patterns. These facilities often incorporate ballistic testing equipment, chronographs, and accuracy measurement systems that provide objective performance data for weapons evaluation and customer demonstration purposes. Customer-based development for weapons smuggling operations involves building relationships with various criminal organizations, rebel groups, and independent operators who require access to military-grade equipment for their activities. Gang weapons dealers often specialize in serving specific customer types based on their connections, expertise, and risk tolerance for different types of operations. Some dealers focus on supplying other gang organizations with basic infantry weapons and ammunition, while others develop relationships with more sophisticated customers who require advanced equipment and specialized services. Rebel movement supply operations present both opportunities and risks for gang weapons smugglers, as these customers often require large quantities of equipment while operating under intense scrutiny from Imperial security forces. Gang dealers who serve rebel movements typically demand premium prices while implementing enhanced security measures that protect their operations from discovery through rebel infiltration or capture. These operations often involve complex payment arrangements that account for the rebels' limited access to standard currency, while accepting alternative compensations such as information, services, or captured equipment. Xenos trader relationships represent the most dangerous and potentially lucrative aspect of gang weapons smuggling, as these operations involve contact with non-human species that Imperial law considers inherently treasonous. Gang dealers who engage in Xenos trade typically operate through multiple layers of intermediaries that insulate them from direct contact with alien species, while providing plausible deniability if their activities are discovered by Imperial authorities. These operations often take place in remote locations such as abandoned mining facilities, derelict spacecraft, or isolated asteroid installations that minimize the risk of detection while providing secure environments for complex negotiations. Protection racket operations form a crucial component of gang economic activities by extracting tribute from legitimate businesses, pilgrims, and merchant caravans in exchange for security services and safe passage through gang-controlled territories. These operations require careful balance between the tribute demands that generate revenue and the actual security services that justify the protection fees, while building customer loyalty and reducing resistance to gang control. Successful protection rackets operate on established rate structures that account for customer financial capabilities, risk levels, and the value of goods or services being protected. Legitimate business relationships with protection rackets often develop organically as merchants and service providers recognize the practical benefits of gang protection in environments where Imperial security forces provide inadequate coverage or response times. Gang protection services typically include escort services for valuable shipments, security patrols in commercial districts, and rapid response capabilities for dealing with theft, vandalism, or harassment by rival criminal organizations. These services often prove more effective and reliable than official security options, while costing less than private security contractors who lack local knowledge and territorial presence. Rate structures for protection services typically incorporate multiple factors, including the value of goods being protected, the distance traveled through gang territory, the level of threat present in specific areas, and the duration of protection required. Basic protection for individual travelers might cost a few throne gelt for safe passage through gang territory, while comprehensive security packages for valuable cargo shipments could involve payments equivalent to several percent of the shipment's total value. Gang protection coordinators develop expertise in assessing customer needs and financial capabilities that allows them to maximize revenue while maintaining competitive pricing that discourages customers from seeking alternative security arrangements. Enforcement mechanisms for protection rackets require careful calibration of intimidation and actual violence to maintain customer compliance, while avoiding actions that might provoke Imperial security intervention or drive away potential customers. Gang enforcers typically begin with verbal warnings and minor harassment that demonstrate their capability and resolve without causing permanent damage to customer operations. Escalation procedures involve property damage, temporary business disruption, or limited violence against customer personnel that creates pressure for compliance while maintaining plausible deniability about gang involvement. Pilgrim route protection represents a specialized form of protection racket that exploits the religious obligations and limited resources of Imperial citizens undertaking spiritual journeys to sacred sites throughout the Hive city. Gang protection services for pilgrims typically focus on safe passage through dangerous territories, security during overnight stops, and assistance with navigation through complex underhive passages that pilgrims cannot traverse safely without local knowledge and armed escort. The religious nature of these operations often requires gang personnel to demonstrate respect for Imperial religious practices while maintaining their authority and effectiveness as security providers. Sacred site access control allows gangs to extract tribute from pilgrims while positioning themselves as facilitators of legitimate religious activities rather than simple extortionists. Gang-controlled access points to religious sites typically incorporate security screening, crowd control, and facility maintenance services that justify protection fees while creating opportunities for additional revenue through the sale of religious items, food, and accommodation services. The most successful gang operations around religious sites develop reputations for fair treatment and effective security that attract pilgrims from throughout the Hive, while building relationships with legitimate religious authorities. Merchant caravan security services require more sophisticated capabilities due to the valuable cargoes, complex routes, and extended durations that characterize commercial transportation operations. Gang security teams assigned to caravan protection typically include specialists in route planning, threat assessment, and the operation of heavy weapon systems that can engage organized attacks by rival gangs or other threats. These teams must maintain constant vigilance during multi-day journeys while coordinating with caravan personnel to ensure smooth operations and customer satisfaction. Cargo assessment procedures allow gang security coordinators to determine appropriate protection levels while identifying valuable items that might require special handling or enhanced security measures. Gang personnel develop expertise in recognizing different types of commercial goods, assessing their market value, and understanding the specific threats that different cargo types might attract from thieves or rival organizations. This knowledge allows gangs to provide effective protection while pricing their services appropriately for the risks involved and the value being protected. Route security analysis involves detailed intelligence gathering about threats along planned travel routes, including rival gang activities, environmental hazards, and the locations of Imperial security checkpoints that might complicate caravan operations. Gang security teams maintain current information about road conditions, bridge capacity, fuel availability, and safe stopping points that allow them to plan efficient routes while minimizing exposure to various threats. This intelligence capability often proves more valuable to customers than simple armed escort services, as it allows caravans to avoid problems rather than fighting through them. Slavery and human trafficking operations represent the most morally reprehensible aspect of gang economic activities, involving the capture, transport, and sale of human beings for various forms of forced labor, sexual exploitation, and biological processing. These operations typically target vulnerable populations, including rival gang members captured during conflicts, civilians caught in contested territories during gang wars, and individuals whose disappearance will not trigger intensive investigation by imperial authorities. Gang slavers develop expertise in identifying suitable targets while maintaining the operational security necessary to avoid detection by law enforcement agencies that treat human trafficking as a serious crime, warranting significant investigation and prosecution efforts. Capture operations for slavery purposes typically exploit the chaos and violence that characterize gang warfare to acquire prisoners whose disappearance can be attributed to normal combat casualties rather than organized criminal activity. Gang raiding parties often coordinate their attacks to maximize prisoner acquisition while maintaining their primary tactical objectives, using non-lethal weapons and restraint techniques that preserve captives for later sale. These operations require careful planning to ensure that captured individuals can be transported and held securely while avoiding detection by rival gangs or imperial security forces who might interfere with trafficking activities. Rival gang member acquisition represents a particularly valuable category of slavery operations due to the specialized knowledge and skills that experienced gang fighters possess, making them suitable for various forms of forced labor or sale to organizations requiring trained personnel. Gang slavers often target specific individuals whose technical expertise, combat experience, or knowledge of enemy operations makes them particularly valuable to potential buyers. The capture of rival gang leaders or specialists can serve dual purposes of weakening enemy organizations while generating revenue through their sale to interested parties. Civilian population targeting for slavery operations typically focuses on individuals whose disappearance will not trigger intensive investigation efforts, including transients, undocumented residents, and people whose social connections provide limited protection from criminal exploitation. Gang slavers develop intelligence networks that identify suitable targets while monitoring law enforcement activities that might interfere with capture operations. These networks often include corrupt officials, informants within legitimate businesses, and contacts in social service organizations who can provide information about vulnerable individuals. Transportation networks for human trafficking require sophisticated logistics capabilities that can move captives across gang territories while maintaining security and avoiding detection by law enforcement agencies or rival criminal organizations. Gang trafficking operations typically utilize modified vehicles with concealed compartments, safe houses for temporary holding, and communication systems that coordinate movement schedules while providing security updates about law enforcement activities. These networks often span multiple hive levels and may include connections to off-world trafficking organizations that expand market opportunities while increasing operational complexity. Corpse starch factory supply operations represent a particularly grim aspect of gang trafficking activities that exploits the massive demand for protein processing in hive cities where conventional food production cannot meet population requirements. Gang suppliers develop relationships with factory personnel who require steady supplies of biological material while maintaining plausible deniability about the sources of their raw materials. These operations typically involve the delivery of bodies to processing facilities during off hours when security is minimal and documentation requirements can be circumvented through corruption or falsified paperwork. Processing facility relationships require careful management of corrupt contacts within legitimate food production operations who can facilitate the disposal of trafficking victims while providing cover for gang activities. Gang representatives often pose as legitimate waste disposal contractors or medical facility personnel who routinely transport biological materials to processing centers. These relationships typically involve regular payments to facility personnel who ask few questions about the sources of delivered materials, while ensuring that gang activities do not attract unwanted attention from facility management or regulatory authorities. Documentation falsification for corpse starch supply operations involves the creation of fake medical certificates, death records, and transportation manifests that provide legal cover for the delivery of bodies to processing facilities. Gang document specialists develop expertise in reproducing official forms and identification systems while maintaining relationships with corrupt officials who can provide authentic documents when necessary. The quality of falsified documentation often determines the success of trafficking operations, as sophisticated forgeries can withstand casual inspection, while obvious fakes may trigger investigations that expose entire trafficking networks. The complex web of relationships between hive gangs and imperial authorities operates on multiple levels of corruption, pragmatism, and mutual exploitation that often blur the boundaries between law enforcement and criminal enterprise. Local Arbites precincts, theoretically the bastions of imperial justice in the underhive, frequently find themselves compromised through systematic infiltration campaigns that gangs execute with patience and precision spanning decades. The process begins with the identification of vulnerable Arbites personnel, junior officers facing financial hardship, veterans suffering from combat trauma, or ambitious individuals whose career advancement has stalled within the rigid hierarchy of imperial law enforcement. Gang infiltration specialists develop detailed psychological profiles of target Arbites through surveillance operations that monitor their daily routines, social interactions, and behavioral patterns that reveal exploitable weaknesses. A young arbitrator struggling to support an extended family on meager imperial wages becomes susceptible to offers of additional income in exchange for minor favors, such as delayed responses to certain incidents or selective blindness regarding specific criminal activities. Senior judges facing mandatory retirement without adequate pension provisions may prove receptive to arrangements that ensure their financial security in exchange for advance warning about planned enforcement operations or the selective interpretation of evidence in criminal proceedings. The corruption process typically unfolds through gradual escalation that begins with seemingly innocuous requests and progresses to more serious compromises that create mutual dependence between gang operatives and corrupt officials. Initial approaches might involve simple social contact in bars or recreational facilities, where off-duty Arbites personnel relax, with gang representatives presenting themselves as legitimate businesspeople or concerned citizens offering information about criminal activities. These relationships develop over months or years as trust builds, and the Arbites personnel become comfortable accepting small gifts, information payments, or social favors that gradually compromise their professional integrity. Bribery operations targeting Arbites precincts require sophisticated financial arrangements that provide plausible explanations for sudden wealth, while avoiding the scrutiny that dramatic lifestyle changes might attract from internal affairs investigations. Gang financial specialists develop payment systems that utilize legitimate business fronts, gambling winnings, inheritance claims, or other sources of income that explain improved living standards without raising suspicions among colleagues or supervisors. The most effective bribery schemes provide corrupt officials with steady supplemental income rather than large lump sum payments that might trigger investigation by precinct accountants or imperial auditors. Advanced bribery networks often incorporate multiple layers of intermediaries that insulate gang leadership from direct contact with corrupt officials while providing operational security against investigation or betrayal. Legitimate businesspeople with connections to both criminal organizations and law enforcement agencies serve as intermediaries who can arrange meetings, facilitate payments, and provide cover stories that explain relationships between gangs and Arbites personnel. These intermediaries typically maintain careful records of transactions and relationships that serve as insurance against betrayal, while providing evidence that can destroy corrupt officials who might consider cooperation with internal investigations. Intimidation tactics complement bribery efforts by creating additional pressure on Arbites personnel who might resist corruption attempts or consider reporting gang infiltration activities to their superiors. Gang intimidation specialists develop detailed intelligence about the personal lives of target officials, including family members, social relationships, and daily routines that create vulnerabilities that can be exploited through threats or demonstration of gang capabilities. The most effective intimidation campaigns combine subtle threats with demonstrations of gang power that make the consequences of resistance clear without crossing lines that might provoke massive retaliation from Imperial authorities. Family targeting represents one of the most effective intimidation techniques, as Arbites personnel who might accept personal risks to maintain their professional integrity often prove more susceptible to threats against spouses, children, or elderly relatives who lack protection from gang retaliation. Gang intelligence networks identify family members' work locations, school attendance patterns, and social activities that create opportunities for contact or demonstration of gang surveillance capabilities. The mere knowledge that gangs possess detailed information about family members often proves sufficient to ensure cooperation without requiring explicit threats or actual violence. Professional sabotage campaigns target the career prospects and personal reputation of Arbites personnel who resist gang corruption efforts, using false accusations, planted evidence, or manipulation of existing rivalries within precinct hierarchies to discredit uncooperative officials. Gang infiltrators within Arbites administrative systems can alter records, delay promotions, or create disciplinary problems that undermine the effectiveness and morale of honest officers while demonstrating the consequences of refusing gang overtures. These campaigns often prove more effective than direct threats because they operate through official channels that provide plausible deniability while creating ongoing pressure that wears down resistance over time. The placement of gang informants within Arbites ranks represents the ultimate goal of infiltration campaigns, as these individuals provide real-time intelligence about law enforcement activities while actively sabotaging operations that might threaten gang interests. Gang informants within Arbites precincts typically begin as support personnel, civilian contractors, or junior officers who gradually advance through the hierarchy while maintaining their criminal loyalties. The most valuable informants achieve positions that provide access to operational planning, intelligence files, and communication systems that allow comprehensive monitoring of law enforcement activities. Recruitment of gang informants from existing Arbites personnel requires careful assessment of individual motivations, psychological vulnerabilities, and the specific circumstances that might make loyal Imperial servants willing to betray their oaths of service. Financial desperation, ideological disillusionment, personal grievances against the Imperial system, or blackmail leverage from past indiscretions create opportunities for gang recruiters who understand how to exploit human weaknesses while providing compelling reasons for cooperation. The most successful recruitment operations combine multiple pressure points that make resistance seem futile while offering attractive benefits for cooperation. Training programs for gang informants within law enforcement focus on operational security, intelligence gathering techniques, and the subtle sabotage methods that can disrupt investigations without attracting suspicion from colleagues or supervisors. Gang intelligence specialists teach informants how to identify valuable information, establish secure communication protocols, and maintain their cover identities while providing useful intelligence about law enforcement activities. Advanced training includes techniques for manipulating evidence, misdirecting investigations, and creating bureaucratic delays that protect gang operations while appearing to result from normal administrative inefficiencies. Communication systems linking gang informants to their criminal handlers must provide reliable contact while maintaining operational security that protects both parties from discovery through routine counterintelligence activities or investigation of suspected corruption. Dead drops utilizing concealed locations allow informants to pass intelligence without direct contact with gang personnel, while coded messages transmitted through legitimate communication channels provide secure methods for routine intelligence reporting. Emergency communication protocols ensure that critical intelligence about imminent law enforcement operations can be transmitted quickly while maintaining security against interception or analysis by Imperial intelligence services. The strategic value of Imperial Guard recruitment drives for gang organizations extends far beyond simple personnel acquisition to encompass intelligence gathering, equipment procurement, and the establishment of connections within Imperial military structures that can provide long-term advantages. Gang leaders recognize that failed Imperial Guard recruits often possess valuable military training, weapons familiarity, and knowledge of Imperial military procedures, while facing disappointment and resentment that make them susceptible to criminal recruitment. The systematic identification and recruitment of these individuals allows gangs to acquire military expertise while building networks within legitimate military organizations. Imperial Guard recruitment processes create natural opportunities for gang infiltration through the placement of gang members within recruit populations, administrative personnel, or support staff who can influence selection decisions while gathering intelligence about military requirements and procedures. Gang infiltrators posing as legitimate recruits can undergo partial training before deliberately failing qualification requirements, allowing them to acquire military knowledge while avoiding actual service obligations that would remove them from gang activities. These infiltrators often maintain contact with successfully recruited individuals who enter Imperial Guard service, creating intelligence networks that span both criminal and military organizations. The corruption of Imperial Guard recruitment personnel provides gangs with opportunities to influence selection decisions while acquiring advanced intelligence about military manpower requirements, training schedules, and equipment allocations that affect gang operations. Recruitment officers facing quotas that exceed available qualified personnel may prove receptive to arrangements that provide suitable candidates in exchange for favors such as advance warning about security sweeps or access to military equipment and supplies. These relationships often develop through social contact and mutual favors before progressing to more serious criminal cooperation. Equipment diversion during recruitment operations allows gangs to acquire military hardware while recruitment personnel meet their quotas and maintain their operational effectiveness. Gang representatives can arrange for weapons, equipment, and supplies to be reported as issued to recruits who subsequently fail training or desert from service, providing cover for equipment transfers while maintaining plausible documentation that satisfies administrative requirements. These operations require careful coordination between gang personnel and corrupt recruitment officials to ensure that equipment disappearances align with recruit departure schedules while avoiding inventory discrepancies that might trigger investigation. The formation of penal legions during times of crisis creates opportunities for gang members to enter Imperial military service while maintaining their criminal loyalties and connections to underhive organizations. Imperial authorities facing desperate manpower shortages often implement mass conscription programs that include criminals, gang members, and other undesirable populations who would normally be excluded from military service. Gang leaders can exploit these situations by encouraging their members to volunteer for penal legion service while maintaining communication networks that allow coordination between military units and criminal organizations. Penal legion recruitment provides gang members with access to military training, equipment, and operational experience that significantly enhances their capabilities when they return to criminal activities after completing their service obligations or deserting from military units. Gang veterans of penal legion service often become valuable assets who can train other gang members in military tactics, weapons maintenance, and the exploitation of Imperial military procedures for criminal purposes. The combat experience gained during penal legion operations also provides these individuals with enhanced status within gang hierarchies while demonstrating their loyalty and competence under extreme pressure. Intelligence gathering opportunities within penal legions allow gang members to acquire detailed knowledge about Imperial military capabilities, operational procedures, and strategic planning that can benefit criminal organizations long after individual gang members complete their military service. Penal Legion personnel often receive briefings about enemy capabilities, strategic objectives, and operational security measures that provide valuable intelligence about Imperial military activities. Gang members serving in penal legions can gather this information while maintaining their criminal loyalties, creating intelligence networks that span both military and criminal organizations. The relationship between gang members serving in auxiliary forces and their criminal organizations requires careful management to maintain operational security while maximizing the benefits of military service for gang objectives. Gang members in auxiliary roles often have access to military communications, supply systems, and operational intelligence that can benefit their criminal associates while serving legitimate military functions. However, these relationships must be managed carefully to avoid detection by military intelligence services or betrayal by rival gang members who might use knowledge of dual loyalties to gain advantages within criminal hierarchies. Urban warfare campaigns create specific opportunities for gang recruitment by Imperial military forces who require local knowledge, specialized skills, and expendable personnel for dangerous operations in complex urban environments. Gang members possess intimate knowledge of Hive City terrain, experience with urban combat tactics, and familiarity with local populations that make them valuable assets for military operations in their home territories. Imperial commanders facing difficult urban warfare scenarios often overlook the criminal backgrounds of potential recruits in favor of their practical capabilities and local expertise. Local knowledge advantages provided by gang members include detailed understanding of building layouts, tunnel networks, and the complex three-dimensional terrain that characterizes Hive City combat environments. Gang fighters can guide Imperial forces through areas that would be impassable or extremely dangerous for conventional military units, while identifying defensive positions, escape routes, and strategic locations that affect tactical planning. This knowledge often proves more valuable than additional conventional military personnel who lack familiarity with local conditions and terrain features. Specialized urban combat skills, developed by gang members through years of territorial warfare, provide Imperial forces with capabilities that complement conventional military training while addressing specific challenges present in Hive City environments. Gang fighters excel at close-quarters combat, improvised weapons employment, and the psychological warfare techniques that prove effective in urban combat situations. Their experience with building clearing, tunnel fighting, and the integration of civilian populations into combat operations provides Imperial forces with enhanced capabilities for complex urban warfare scenarios. The tolerance exhibited by Hive nobility toward gang activities reflects complex calculations about political stability, economic efficiency, and the practical limitations of Imperial authority in the vast underhive territories that extend beyond effective government control. Noble houses often view gangs as useful tools for maintaining order in areas where official Imperial administration proves inadequate or prohibitively expensive, while providing services that legitimate authorities cannot deliver effectively. This pragmatic approach to gang activities allows noble houses to maintain plausible deniability about their involvement in criminal enterprises, while benefiting from the stability and economic activity that organized criminal groups provide. Unofficial enforcement relationships between noble houses and gang organizations typically develop through intermediaries who can arrange services, while insulating both parties from direct association that might prove politically embarrassing or legally compromising. Noble houses require various services that gangs can provide more efficiently than legitimate contractors: debt collection from recalcitrant business partners, intimidation of political rivals, elimination of individuals who pose threats to noble interests, and intelligence gathering about activities within noble territories. Gang organizations benefit from these relationships through access to resources, protection from law enforcement, and opportunities for expansion into more profitable criminal enterprises. Economic arrangements between nobles and gangs often involve complex financial structures that provide gangs with legitimate business fronts while giving noble houses access to profitable criminal enterprises without direct involvement in illegal activities. Noble-owned businesses can serve as money laundering operations for gang profits while providing employment and cover identities for gang members who need to interact with legitimate society. These arrangements typically include profit-sharing agreements that provide noble houses with substantial returns on their investments while ensuring gang loyalty and continued cooperation. Political protection provided by noble houses to allied gang organizations includes interference with law enforcement activities, manipulation of judicial proceedings, and the use of political influence to prevent or redirect investigations that might threaten gang operations. Noble houses often maintain extensive networks of corrupt officials, judges, and administrators who can be activated to protect gang interests when necessary. This protection typically extends beyond simple bribery to encompass more sophisticated forms of political manipulation that exploit the complex bureaucratic structures of imperial administration. Intelligence sharing between noble houses and gang organizations creates mutually beneficial relationships that enhance the capabilities of both parties while providing advantages over rivals who lack similar criminal connections. Gang intelligence networks provide noble houses with information about political rivals, business competitors, and potential threats that official intelligence services might miss or deliberately conceal. Noble houses reciprocate by sharing information about government activities, political developments, and economic opportunities that allow gangs to adapt their operations while avoiding potential problems with imperial authorities. The maintenance of plausible deniability requires careful management of relationships between noble houses and gang organizations to ensure that criminal activities cannot be traced directly to noble sponsors while maintaining the effectiveness of unofficial enforcement arrangements. This typically involves multiple layers of intermediaries, careful documentation practices, and operational security measures that prevent the discovery of direct connections between noble houses and criminal enterprises. Noble houses often employ legitimate security firms, private investigators, or business consultants who can interact with gang organizations while providing cover for more sensitive activities. Crackdown operations initiated by visiting inquisitors represent existential threats to gang organizations that require immediate and comprehensive responses to prevent the destruction of entire criminal enterprises. Inquisitors possess virtually unlimited authority to investigate criminal activities while commanding resources that far exceed the capabilities of local law enforcement agencies. Their arrival in Hive cities typically triggers massive security operations that disrupt gang activities while creating opportunities for rival organizations to exploit the chaos and confusion that accompany major law enforcement campaigns. Inquisitorial investigation methods include sophisticated surveillance techniques, interrogation procedures, and intelligence analysis capabilities that can penetrate even the most secure gang operations while identifying connections and relationships that local authorities might miss. Inquisitors often employ specialized personnel with expertise in criminal investigation, psychological analysis, and the technical capabilities necessary for monitoring communications and tracking financial transactions. These investigations typically focus on identifying leadership structures, operational procedures, and the connections between different criminal organizations that allow comprehensive dismantling of gang networks. Gang response strategies to inquisitorial investigations typically involve immediate implementation of emergency security protocols that protect key personnel while preserving essential operational capabilities for future reconstruction efforts. Gang leaders often activate predetermined escape plans that allow them to evacuate critical personnel and resources while destroying evidence that might compromise surviving organization members. These response plans typically include safe house networks, alternative communication systems, and financial arrangements that allow gang operations to continue at reduced levels while avoiding detection by inquisitorial forces. The purge operations that typically follow inquisitorial investigations involve systematic elimination of identified gang members, destruction of criminal infrastructure, and the implementation of enhanced security measures designed to prevent gang reformation. These operations often involve multiple Imperial agencies working in coordination, Arbites forces conducting arrests and seizures, Imperial Guard units providing security and firepower, and Adeptus Mechanica specialists analyzing captured technology and communications equipment. The scope and intensity of purge operations typically exceed anything that gangs have experienced during routine law enforcement activities, requiring entirely different response strategies and survival techniques. Survival tactics employed by gang members during purge operations focus on avoiding detection while maintaining minimal operational capabilities that allow eventual reconstruction of criminal enterprises. Gang members often assume false identities, relocate to different hive levels, or temporarily join legitimate organizations that provide cover while Imperial forces conduct their operations. The most successful survival strategies involve careful preparation that begins long before inquisitorial investigations commence, including the establishment of alternative identities, hidden resource caches, and communication networks that can operate independently of normal gang infrastructure. The arrival of new planetary governors often triggers comprehensive reviews of security policies and law enforcement effectiveness that can dramatically alter the operational environment for gang organizations throughout the Hive City. New governors typically seek to demonstrate their competence and loyalty to Imperial authorities by implementing vigorous anti-crime campaigns that target the most visible and problematic criminal organizations. These campaigns often receive substantial resource allocations and political support that allow them to achieve results that previous law enforcement efforts could not accomplish through routine operations. Administrative restructuring under new planetary governors can eliminate the corrupt relationships and protection arrangements that gang organizations have developed over decades of operation, while introducing new personnel and procedures that are resistant to traditional gang infiltration techniques. New governors often import trusted personnel from other worlds to fill key security positions, while implementing enhanced oversight procedures that make corruption more difficult to establish and maintain. These changes typically require gang organizations to completely rebuild their intelligence networks and political connections, while adapting to new law enforcement procedures and security measures. Enhanced enforcement capabilities provided to law enforcement agencies under new planetary governors often include additional personnel, advanced equipment, and expanded authority that significantly increase the risks associated with gang operations. New governors may authorize the use of military personnel for law enforcement activities, implement martial law provisions that suspend normal legal protections, or provide law enforcement agencies with surveillance and investigation capabilities that were previously unavailable. These enhanced capabilities typically require gang organizations to implement more sophisticated operational security measures while reducing their overall activity levels to avoid detection. The systematic restoration of Imperial law and order under determined planetary governors typically involves comprehensive campaigns that address not only criminal activities, but also the underlying social and economic conditions that support gang operations. These restoration efforts may include infrastructure improvement projects that eliminate the environmental hazards and abandoned areas where gangs typically establish their territories, economic development programs that provide legitimate employment alternatives to criminal activities, and social services that address the desperation and alienation that drive recruitment into gang organizations. The success of these comprehensive approaches often determines whether anti-gang campaigns achieve lasting results or merely create temporary disruptions that allow gang organizations to rebuild and adapt their operations. The insidious nature of chaos corruption within Hive gang structures operates through pathways that exploit the desperate circumstances and violent culture that define underhive existence. Gang leaders facing existential threats to their organizations often discover mysterious artifacts buried in the deepest reaches of their territories, corroded metal fragments that pulse with unnatural warmth, crystalline formations that whisper promises of power in languages that predate Imperial Gothic, or weapons that seem to anticipate their wielders' violent intentions. These relics of the dark age of technology, tainted by millennia of exposure to warp energies, serve as conduits through which the ruinous powers extend their influence into the material realm. The gradual corruption process typically begins when gang leaders handle these artifacts during moments of extreme stress or desperation. A Goliath boss cornered by rival gangs might grasp a corroded power maul that floods his nervous system with unnatural strength, while simultaneously implanting subtle suggestions about the weakness of his enemies and the righteousness of extreme violence. An Escher matriarch facing the collapse of her drug distribution network discovers a crystalline formation that enhances her chemical knowledge exponentially while slowly altering her perception of morality and the value of human suffering in her experiments. These initial contacts with chaos artifacts create psychological dependencies that mirror the effects of the most addictive combat stimulants produced in gang laboratories. The enhanced capabilities provided by tainted artifacts become essential for maintaining leadership positions and organizational effectiveness, while the gradual corruption of thought patterns makes the moral compromises required for continued artifact use seem increasingly reasonable and necessary. Gang leaders who initially resist the darker impulses encouraged by their artifacts find themselves making exceptions during crisis situations that gradually expand into standard operating procedures. The whispered promises that accompany chaos corruption exploit the specific ambitions and fears that drive individual gang leaders while offering solutions that seem perfectly tailored to their immediate needs. Khorne's influence manifests through artifacts that promise victory through superior violence, encouraging gang leaders to escalate conflicts while providing the combat effectiveness necessary to survive the increased dangers. Nurgle's corruption spreads through items that offer protection from the diseases and toxins that plague underhive existence, gradually transforming users into carriers of even more virulent plagues that they spread unknowingly throughout their territories. Slaanish's corruption typically enters gang hierarchies through artifacts that enhance the production and effects of recreational drugs, providing gang chemists with formulations that create unprecedented euphoric experiences while slowly rewiring the brain chemistry of both producers and consumers. The enhanced profits and customer loyalty generated by these superior narcotics justify the increasingly extreme methods required to produce them, while the chemical changes in gang members' brains make the moral implications of their actions seem irrelevant compared to the pursuit of ever greater sensations. Tzeentch's influence operates through artifacts that provide strategic advantages and prophetic insights that allow gang leaders to anticipate enemy actions while positioning their organizations for maximum benefit from changing circumstances. The enhanced planning capabilities and tactical foresight provided by these items prove invaluable for gang survival, while the gradual expansion of ambitions and the increasing complexity of schemes required to maintain these advantages slowly transform straightforward gang leaders into manipulative conspirators whose plans span multiple generations and incorporate dozens of seemingly unrelated organizations. The bargaining process that occurs during desperate gang wars creates additional opportunities for chaos corruption, as leaders facing imminent destruction prove willing to accept assistance from any source that offers survival for their organizations. Demon princes and greater demons exploit these moments of desperation by offering immediate aid in exchange for seemingly minor concessions that establish footholds for further corruption. A gang leader might accept the services of unnaturally skilled fighters who appear during a crucial battle, not realizing that these reinforcements are cultists, whose presence begins corrupting his existing forces through example and direct influence. The terms of these desperate bargains typically appear reasonable and beneficial to gang leaders who lack understanding of the true nature of chaos corruption. A demon might offer to enhance the combat effectiveness of gang fighters in exchange for the establishment of specific rituals that seem like harmless traditions or tactical procedures. The enhanced capabilities provided by these arrangements prove crucial for gang survival, while the required rituals gradually accustom gang members to activities that prepare them for more serious forms of chaos worship. Payment collection for these diabolic bargains often occurs through methods that the corrupted gang leaders do not initially recognize as supernatural. Gang members might begin experiencing unusually vivid dreams that provide tactical insights while slowly altering their psychological makeup. Equipment failures might become less frequent, while maintenance procedures evolve into ritualistic activities that incorporate blasphemous symbols and incantations. The gradual nature of these changes allows gang members to rationalize each individual modification while remaining unaware of the cumulative transformation occurring within their organization. The enforcement mechanisms employed by chaos entities to ensure compliance with bargain agreements typically exploit the enhanced capabilities that corruption provides, while making withdrawal from these arrangements increasingly difficult. Gang members who attempt to abandon corrupted practices often find that their combat effectiveness, leadership abilities, or technical skills deteriorate rapidly without the supernatural enhancements they have come to depend upon. The practical necessities of gang warfare make it impossible to survive these capability losses, forcing continued compliance with increasingly demanding supernatural requirements. Genestealer cult infiltration tactics targeting gang structures exploit the hierarchical nature of criminal organizations, while offering concrete benefits that address the immediate survival needs of underhive populations. The initial infiltration typically occurs through the introduction of individuals who possess unusual physical capabilities or technical knowledge that makes them valuable additions to gang operations. These infiltrators might appear as refugees from destroyed gang territories, skilled specialists seeking employment, or prisoners captured during territorial conflicts who demonstrate exceptional abilities that justify their recruitment into the gang hierarchy. The promises of unity and strength offered by Genestealer cult agents resonate powerfully with gang members who face constant threats from rival organizations, imperial authorities, and the harsh environmental conditions of underhive existence. Cult infiltrators present their ideology as a practical philosophy that emphasizes collective action, mutual support, and the development of enhanced human capabilities through biological improvement and spiritual enlightenment. The benefits offered by cult membership include access to advanced biotechnology, enhanced physical capabilities, and the psychological security that comes from belonging to an organization with resources and connections that extend far beyond individual gang territories. The biological enhancements provided to gang recruits by Genestealer cults typically begin with subtle improvements that can be explained through advanced medical techniques or exposure to beneficial mutations. Gang members might receive treatments that improve their resistance to toxins, enhance their physical strength, or accelerate healing from combat injuries. These enhancements prove invaluable for gang operations, while creating dependencies that make continued cult membership essential for maintaining competitive advantages over rival organizations. The conversion process employed by Genestealer cults typically targets entire gang hierarchies through systematic recruitment campaigns that begin with lower-level members before progressing to leadership positions. Cult agents identify gang members who demonstrate leadership potential, technical expertise, or social influence that makes them valuable targets for conversion. The recruitment process typically involves gradual exposure to cult ideology through social activities, shared combat experiences, and participation in seemingly legitimate community improvement projects that demonstrate cult capabilities, while building personal relationships between cult members and potential recruits. The targeting of gang hierarchies requires sophisticated intelligence operations that identify the power structures, personal relationships, and decision-making processes that govern specific criminal organizations. Cult infiltrators spend months or years observing gang operations while building detailed profiles of key personnel that identify their motivations, fears, and the specific benefits that might encourage their conversion to cult membership. This intelligence gathering often occurs through legitimate social contact, business relationships, or participation in neutral zone activities, where gang members interact with outsiders without the suspicions that would arise from direct recruitment attempts. The systematic conversion of gang leadership typically follows predetermined sequences that ensure organizational continuity while minimizing the risk of detection by unconverted gang members or external authorities. Cult agents often begin by converting gang members who occupy supporting roles such as medical personnel, technical specialists, or communications operators, whose enhanced capabilities can be attributed to improved training or access to better equipment. These converted specialists then provide services to other gang members while gradually introducing cult ideology through casual conversation and demonstration of superior techniques. The transformation of gang rituals and traditions into heretical practices typically occurs through gradual modifications that appear to improve existing procedures, while slowly incorporating elements that prepare gang members for more serious forms of cult worship. Gang initiation ceremonies might be enhanced with biological components that cult infiltrators claim will improve the bonding process between new recruits and existing gang members. Combat preparation rituals might incorporate meditation techniques that cult agents present as methods for improving focus and tactical awareness, while actually serving as preliminary forms of psychic conditioning. Traditional gang practices provide convenient foundations for cult ritual development because they already incorporate elements of group identity, loyalty testing, and the acceptance of violence that align with cult requirements. Gang loyalty oaths can be modified to include references to collective destiny and biological improvement that introduce cult concepts without immediately revealing their alien origins. Combat rituals that traditionally invoke the Emperor's protection can be gradually altered to include references to the Star Children and the coming transformation that will elevate humanity to its proper place in the galaxy. The unconscious adoption of heretical practices typically occurs when gang members accept ritual modifications that provide tangible benefits while remaining unaware of their true significance. Gang fighters might adopt combat techniques that incorporate specific movement patterns, breathing exercises, or mental focusing methods that cult infiltrators present as advanced martial arts training. These practices often improve combat effectiveness while serving as preliminary forms of psychic conditioning that prepare gang members for more direct forms of cult indoctrination. The preservation of gang cultural identity during the conversion process requires careful balance between introducing cult elements and maintaining the traditions and symbols that provide organizational continuity. Cult infiltrators typically present their ideology as an enhanced version of existing gang beliefs rather than a replacement for established traditions. Gang symbols might be modified to incorporate subtle references to cult iconography while maintaining their recognizable appearance and traditional meaning for unconverted members. The case study of the Crimson Reaper's gang on Mordian demonstrates the typical progression of chaos corruption within underhive organizations during the extended siege warfare that characterized the planet's defense against Orc invasions. The Reapers initially operated as a conventional Escher-affiliated gang that controlled chemical processing facilities in Mordian's lower hive levels. Their operations focused on producing combat stimulants for PDF forces and industrial chemicals for legitimate manufacturing operations. The extended siege conditions created severe shortages of raw materials and medical supplies that threatened the gang's survival while creating opportunities for supernatural intervention. The corruption process began when Reaper chemists discovered crystalline formations in abandoned processing facilities that had been damaged during Orc bombardments. These formations, later identified as chaos artifacts tainted by warp energy, provided access to chemical knowledge that allowed the production of stimulants with unprecedented effectiveness while requiring increasingly exotic ingredients and production methods. The enhanced combat drugs produced using knowledge gained from these artifacts proved crucial for PDF resistance efforts, while generating enormous profits for the Reapers through sales to desperate military commanders. The gradual transformation of Reaper operations incorporated elements of Slaanesh worship as the pursuit of ever more effective drug formulations led to experimentation with human test subjects and the incorporation of biological components harvested from living victims. The enhanced stimulants produced through these methods created dependencies among military personnel, while spreading corruption throughout PDF ranks as users experienced psychological changes that made them more susceptible to chaos influence. The Reapers themselves underwent similar transformations as exposure to their own products, and the artifacts that inspired them gradually altered their brain chemistry and moral perspectives. The final stages of Reaper corruption involved the establishment of hidden shrines within their chemical processing facilities, where gang members conducted increasingly elaborate rituals designed to enhance their production capabilities while honoring the entities that provided their supernatural knowledge. These rituals initially appeared to be practical procedures for maintaining equipment and ensuring product quality, but gradually evolved into genuine chaos worship that incorporated human sacrifice, demon summoning, and the systematic corruption of gang recruits through exposure to tainted chemicals and psychological conditioning. The Hive Tertius incident on Necromunda provides another documented example of gang transformation into chaos cultists during the massive gang wars that erupted following the collapse of several major trade routes. The Iron Skulls, originally a Goliath-affiliated gang that controlled heavy manufacturing districts, faced destruction by rival organizations that had formed temporary alliances to capture their valuable industrial territories. The desperate situation led Iron Skull's leadership to seek assistance from mysterious benefactors who offered advanced weapons and tactical support in exchange for seemingly minor ritual obligations. The supernatural assistance provided to the Iron Skulls included access to demon engines that appeared to be sophisticated industrial equipment, weapons that demonstrated unusual effectiveness against enemy forces, and tactical intelligence that allowed them to anticipate and counter enemy operations with unprecedented precision. The enhanced capabilities provided by these resources proved crucial for Iron Skull's survival, while creating dependencies that made continued cooperation with their supernatural benefactors essential for maintaining their territorial holdings and organizational effectiveness. The ritual obligations initially required by the Iron Skull's Chaos patrons appeared to be practical procedures for maintaining equipment and coordinating tactical operations, but gradually evolved into genuine demon worship that incorporated blood sacrifice, the corruption of captured enemies, and the systematic transformation of gang territory into a demon-infested stronghold. The gang members themselves underwent physical and psychological transformations that enhanced their combat effectiveness, while gradually eliminating their capacity for moral reasoning and independent thought. The discovery and purification of Iron Skull's territory by Adeptus Sororitas forces revealed the extent of chaos corruption that had occurred within the gang organization, including demon-possessed manufacturing equipment, ritual chambers constructed from the bones of sacrificed victims, and gang members whose bodies had been so thoroughly corrupted by chaos influence that they could no longer be considered human. The systematic cleansing operation required extensive use of blessed promethium and sanctified explosives to eliminate all traces of chaos taint, while the surviving gang members who demonstrated signs of corruption were subjected to purification rituals that typically proved fatal to the subjects. The Ashfall Collective represents a more subtle example of genestealer cult infiltration that occurred over several decades within the toxic waste processing districts of Armageddon's Hive cities. The collective initially operated as a loose alliance of scavenger gangs that specialized in extracting valuable materials from industrial waste streams while providing disposal services for legitimate manufacturing operations. The harsh working conditions and high mortality rates associated with toxic waste processing created constant demand for new personnel, while making the collective's territories unattractive to rival gang organizations. The infiltration process began with the arrival of refugees from destroyed hive districts who possessed unusual resistance to toxic exposure and advanced knowledge of waste processing techniques that significantly improved collective operations. These infiltrators gradually assumed leadership positions within the collective, while introducing organizational improvements and technological enhancements that increased productivity and reduced casualty rates among gang members. The benefits provided by these improvements generated loyalty and trust that facilitated the gradual introduction of cult ideology through informal education and community-building activities. The biological enhancements provided to collective members initially appeared to result from improved safety procedures and medical treatments that cult infiltrators claim to have learned from advanced civilizations encountered during their travels. Gang members who received these treatments experienced enhanced resistance to radiation and chemical exposure, while developing improved physical capabilities that made them more effective at their dangerous work. The enhanced capabilities proved essential for collective survival, while creating dependencies that made continued cult membership necessary for maintaining competitive advantages over rival organizations. The transformation of collective culture incorporated elements of genestealer cult ideology through gradual modifications of existing traditions and the introduction of new practices that appeared to improve organizational effectiveness while actually serving cult recruitment and indoctrination purposes. Work crews began incorporating group meditation sessions that cult agents presented as stress reduction techniques while actually serving as preliminary forms of psychic conditioning. Safety procedures evolved to include ritual elements that supposedly improved protection from toxic exposure, while actually preparing gang members for more direct forms of cult worship. The final revelation of the collective's true nature occurred during an Imperial Guard investigation into unusual birth rates and genetic anomalies among waste processing workers, which uncovered evidence of systematic genetic manipulation and the presence of hybrid organisms that demonstrated clear xenos characteristics. The subsequent purge operation required coordination between multiple Imperial agencies, while the discovery of extensive tunnel networks beneath collective territory revealed the presence of a fully developed genestealer cult that had been using the waste processing operations as cover for breeding programs and the preparation of uprising activities designed to coincide with Tyrannid fleet arrivals in the system. The trajectory of gang warfare in the closing years of the 41st millennium points toward unprecedented militarization as black market networks expand their reach across Imperial space and advanced weaponry filters down from the constant conflicts that rage throughout the galaxy. The massive scale of Imperial military operations creates enormous opportunities for weapons diversion, while the breakdown of supply chain security during major campaigns allows sophisticated military hardware to reach criminal organizations that previously relied on improvised equipment and basic small arms. Gang armories that once contained collections of stub guns and improvised explosives now house plasma weapons, power armor components, and even vehicle-mounted weapon systems that rival the equipment of planetary defense force units. The technological advancement of gang arsenals reflects broader changes in Imperial military doctrine and manufacturing capabilities as the Imperium adapts to threats that require increasingly sophisticated responses. The mass production of advanced weapons for the Astra Militarum creates surplus inventory that corrupt logistics personnel can divert to black market channels, while the standardization of weapon systems across multiple Imperial organizations makes maintenance and ammunition supply more feasible for criminal organizations. Gang tech adepts who once struggled to maintain a single plasma pistol now oversee workshops that service multiple energy weapons while producing ammunition and replacement parts using stolen standard template construct fragments. Vansar gangs have emerged as the primary beneficiaries of this technological proliferation due to their existing expertise in advanced systems and their established relationships with corrupt Adeptus Mechanicus personnel who provide technical support in exchange for access to archaeotech discoveries. These gangs now field coordinated units equipped with matching sets of Law's weapons, coordinated Vox networks, and even limited air support through the use of modified industrial vehicles equipped with heavy weapons and basic armor protection. The tactical capabilities demonstrated by these technologically advanced gangs have forced rival organizations to seek similar upgrades or face obsolescence in the increasingly sophisticated environment of underhive warfare. The proliferation of military-grade equipment has fundamentally altered the tactical dynamics of gang warfare as organizations adapt their operational procedures to account for the enhanced lethality and range of modern weapon systems. Traditional close-quarters combat tactics that emphasized personal skill and improvised weapons have given way to coordinated fire and movement techniques that mirror Imperial Guard's small unit tactics. Gang leaders who learned warfare through street fighting and building clearance operations now study captured military manuals while implementing command structures and communication procedures adapted from legitimate military organizations. Heavy weapons deployment in gang conflicts has escalated from occasional use of captured equipment to systematic integration of crew-served weapons that provide sustained fire support during major territorial campaigns. Goliath gangs have proven particularly adept at incorporating heavy stubbers, auto cannons, and even missile launchers into their tactical formations, using their industrial expertise to construct firing positions and supply systems that support extended operations. The psychological impact of heavy weapons fire in the confined spaces of hive cities often proves as valuable as their direct combat effectiveness, as the distinctive sound of automatic weapons and explosive impacts can break enemy morale before physical casualties become decisive. The emergence of gang air power through the use of modified civilian aircraft and captured military vehicles represents perhaps the most significant tactical development in recent gang warfare evolution. Orlock gangs, with their expertise in vehicle operation and maintenance, have led this development by converting industrial cargo haulers into improvised gunships equipped with door-mounted weapons and basic armor protection. These aircraft provide reconnaissance capabilities, rapid personnel transport, and fire support that allows gangs to coordinate operations across multiple hive levels while bypassing the traditional territorial boundaries that defined earlier gang conflicts. The role of gangs in defending hive cities during external threats has evolved from opportunistic scavenging during chaos to organized participation in defensive operations that blur the boundaries between criminal enterprises and legitimate military forces. The increasing frequency of Xenos invasions, chaos incursions, and other external threats has created situations where Imperial authorities must choose between maintaining law enforcement priorities and utilizing every available resource for planetary defense. Gang organizations possess intimate knowledge of Hive City terrain, established command structures, and combat-experienced personnel that make them valuable assets during crisis situations, despite their criminal nature. Orc invasions of Hive worlds create particularly complex situations where gang territories become crucial defensive positions that must be held regardless of the criminal status of their occupants. The Orcs' preference for direct assault tactics and their limited understanding of Hive City architecture often make gang-controlled areas into natural defensive positions where experienced fighters can inflict disproportionate casualties on invading forces. Imperial military commanders facing overwhelming Orc numbers have increasingly turned to informal alliances with gang organizations that can provide local fighters knowledge of defensive positions and access to hidden supply caches that support extended resistance operations. The integration of gang forces into defensive operations typically occurs through unofficial arrangements that provide gangs with access to military equipment and supplies in exchange for their participation in coordinated defensive plans. These arrangements allow Imperial commanders to maintain plausible deniability about their cooperation with criminal organizations, while providing gang leaders with opportunities to demonstrate their patriotic loyalty and potential for rehabilitation. The most successful examples of gang military cooperation have occurred when experienced Imperial Guard officers serve as liaisons who understand both military requirements and the cultural dynamics that govern gang behavior. Tyrannid invasions present different challenges that often transform gang territories into crucial early warning systems and refugee processing centers as civilian populations flee the advancing swarms. Gang intelligence networks, developed for monitoring rival criminal activities, prove invaluable for tracking Tyrannid advance elements and identifying infestation patterns that might escape detection by conventional Imperial surveillance systems. The harsh survival skills that characterize gang culture often translate directly into effective resistance techniques against Tyrannid bioforms, while gang medical personnel possess experience treating exotic injuries and toxin exposure that proves crucial during biological warfare scenarios. Chaos incursions create the most complex situations for gang involvement in planetary defense due to the inherent risks of corruption and the difficulty of distinguishing between legitimate resistance activities and heretical collaboration. Imperial authorities must carefully evaluate gang organizations for signs of existing chaos taint while assessing their potential contributions to defensive operations. Gangs with established reputations for emperor worship, such as Cawdor organizations, often receive preferential treatment in these evaluations, while gangs that demonstrate unusual capabilities or possess suspicious equipment face intensive investigation before being considered for defensive roles. The aftermath of successful defensive operations creates opportunities for gang organizations to transition into legitimate military or security roles through formal recognition of their contributions to planetary defense. Gang leaders who demonstrate tactical competence, loyalty to Imperial authority, and the ability to maintain discipline among their forces may receive offers of integration into planetary defense forces or specialized security organizations. These transitions typically involve comprehensive background investigations, loyalty testing, and gradual integration processes that allow former gang members to prove their commitment to legitimate service while maintaining their valuable combat experience and local knowledge. The evolution of gangs into legitimate military forces represents one of several potential futures for successful criminal organizations that adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining their organizational effectiveness. The most successful transitions typically occur when external threats create immediate needs for experienced fighters while providing opportunities for gang leaders to demonstrate their capabilities under legitimate authority. Former gang territories often become recruitment centers for new military units, while gang workshops and supply networks transition into legitimate military support operations that serve broader Imperial defense requirements. Penal Legion formation provides another pathway for gang militarization as Imperial authorities seek to utilize criminal expertise while maintaining appropriate oversight and control measures. Gang members who volunteer for Penal Legion service often bring valuable skills and experience that enhance unit effectiveness, while their criminal backgrounds provide motivation for redemption through service to the Emperor. The harsh discipline and dangerous missions associated with Penal Legion service typically eliminate gang members who cannot adapt to military requirements, while transforming survivors into experienced soldiers who may eventually qualify for transfer to regular Imperial Guard units. The integration challenges associated with gang militarization include overcoming cultural differences between criminal and military organizations, establishing trust between former enemies, and maintaining operational security against potential infiltration by hostile forces. Former gang members often struggle with military discipline and chain of command structures that conflict with the informal leadership patterns that characterize criminal organizations. Military personnel may harbor suspicions about the loyalty and reliability of former criminals, while gang members may resent the restrictions and oversight that military service requires. Training programs designed to facilitate gang militarization typically focus on adapting existing gang skills to military requirements while introducing the discipline and coordination necessary for effective military operations. Gang fighters often possess superior individual combat skills and tactical flexibility that complement formal military training, while their experience with improvised equipment and resource scarcity makes them valuable assets in challenging operational environments. The most successful training programs recognize these existing capabilities while addressing the specific deficiencies that prevent effective integration into military units. The alternative trajectory toward criminal cartel formation represents another potential evolution for gang organizations that successfully expand their operations beyond traditional territorial boundaries while developing sophisticated criminal enterprises that span multiple worlds and star systems. These cartels typically emerge from gangs that develop expertise in specific criminal activities such as drug trafficking, weapons smuggling, or human trafficking, while building the organizational capabilities necessary for managing complex multi-world operations. The transformation from local gang to interplanetary cartel requires significant investment in transportation, communication, and security capabilities that exceed the resources of most gang organizations. Interplanetary operations conducted by criminal cartels exploit the vast scale and limited oversight capabilities of imperial administration to establish supply chains and distribution networks that span multiple star systems. These operations typically focus on high-value, low-volume commodities that justify the costs and risks associated with interstellar transportation, while avoiding the attention that large-scale operations might attract from imperial authorities. Advanced combat drugs, rare archaeotech components, and exotic weapons represent typical cartel commodities that command premium prices while requiring specialized knowledge and capabilities for production and distribution. The organizational structure of criminal cartels typically incorporates elements from both gang hierarchies and legitimate business organizations, while maintaining the security and loyalty mechanisms necessary for managing criminal enterprises across vast distances. Cartel leadership often includes former gang bosses who possess the tactical and leadership experience necessary for managing violent criminal operations, alongside individuals with expertise in interstellar commerce, transportation logistics, and the complex bureaucratic procedures that govern imperial trade and transportation systems. This combination of criminal and legitimate expertise allows cartels to operate effectively in both legal and illegal markets, while maintaining the flexibility necessary for adapting to changing circumstances. Corruption networks developed by criminal cartels often extend far beyond the local officials and law enforcement personnel that traditional gangs typically influence to encompass planetary governors, Imperial Navy officers, and even representatives of various imperial organizations who can provide protection and assistance for cartel operations. The vast resources available to successful cartels allow them to offer bribes and incentives that exceed anything available to local criminal organizations, while their interplanetary operations create opportunities for corrupt officials to benefit from criminal activities without direct involvement in local law enforcement issues. The alternative outcome of complete dissolution under imperial crackdowns represents the fate of gang organizations that cannot adapt to changing circumstances or that attract sufficient imperial attention to warrant comprehensive elimination efforts. These dissolution events typically occur when gang activities escalate beyond the tolerance levels of imperial authorities, or when external circumstances create opportunities for decisive law enforcement action. The arrival of new planetary governors, inquisitorial investigations, or major military campaigns often create conditions that allow Imperial forces to systematically dismantle gang organizations that have operated with relative impunity for decades or centuries. Systematic elimination campaigns typically involve coordination between multiple Imperial agencies that can provide the resources and expertise necessary for comprehensive anti-gang operations. Arbites forces provide law enforcement expertise and local knowledge, while Imperial Guard units supply the firepower and personnel necessary for sustained military operations against fortified gang territories. Adeptus Mechanicus specialists analyze captured technology and communication equipment, while Adeptus Ministorum representatives coordinate psychological warfare campaigns designed to undermine gang morale and encourage defections. The effectiveness of elimination campaigns typically depends on the ability of Imperial forces to maintain operational security while systematically dismantling gang support networks and eliminating key personnel before they can adapt to changing circumstances. Gang organizations that survive initial elimination efforts often prove extremely difficult to completely destroy due to their intimate knowledge of local terrain, their established relationships with civilian populations, and their ability to operate with minimal infrastructure and resources. The most successful elimination campaigns typically involve long-term occupation and reconstruction efforts that address the underlying social and economic conditions that support gang formation while maintaining sufficient security forces to prevent gang reformation. Refugee dispersal represents one method for preventing gang reformation by relocating surviving gang members to different hive cities or worlds, where they lack the local connections and territorial knowledge necessary for reestablishing criminal organizations. These dispersal programs typically involve careful screening to identify individuals who demonstrate potential for rehabilitation while separating hardcore criminals who pose ongoing security risks. The success of dispersal programs often depends on the availability of legitimate employment opportunities and social support systems that provide alternatives to criminal activities, while monitoring systems ensure that former gang members do not establish new criminal enterprises. The eternal cycle that defines underhive ecosystems ensures that gang dissolution in one area typically creates opportunities for new gang formation, as the underlying conditions that support criminal organizations remain unchanged despite successful law enforcement operations. The vast populations of desperate individuals in Hive City lower levels provide constant recruitment pools for new gang organizations, while the complex terrain and limited Imperial oversight capabilities create numerous opportunities for criminal enterprises to establish themselves beyond effective law enforcement reach. The elimination of established gang organizations often creates power vacuums that new criminal groups quickly fill, while the disruption of existing territorial boundaries creates opportunities for expansion by surviving gang organizations. New gang formation typically follows patterns established by previous criminal organizations, as emerging leaders adopt successful tactical and organizational approaches while learning from the mistakes that led to their predecessors' destruction. The weapons, equipment, and infrastructure left behind by eliminated gangs often provide resources for new organizations, while former gang members who escaped elimination efforts bring experience and knowledge that accelerates the development of replacement criminal enterprises. The cyclical nature of gang formation and destruction creates ongoing challenges for Imperial authorities, who must constantly adapt their law enforcement strategies to address new threats while maintaining security in areas that have been cleared of previous criminal organizations. Territorial expansion by surviving gang organizations typically occurs rapidly following the elimination of rival groups, as successful criminal enterprises move to claim valuable territories and resources before new competitors can establish themselves. These expansion efforts often involve temporary alliances between previously hostile gangs who recognize opportunities for mutual benefit through coordinated territorial acquisition, while competition for the most valuable territories can trigger new conflicts that reshape the balance of power throughout entire hive levels. The rapid territorial changes that follow major elimination campaigns often create instability that persists for years or decades as new power structures emerge and stabilize. The absorption of smaller criminal groups by larger organizations represents another common outcome of the cyclical processes that govern underhive criminal ecosystems. Successful gang organizations often expand their operations by incorporating the personnel, resources, and territorial holdings of smaller groups that cannot maintain independent operations in increasingly competitive criminal environments. These absorption processes typically involve negotiated agreements that provide benefits for both parties, while larger organizations gain additional capabilities and smaller groups receive protection and access to resources that ensure their survival within expanded criminal enterprises. As the 41st millennium draws toward its close, the future of hive gangs remains inextricably linked to the broader trajectory of imperial civilization and the increasing pressures that threaten humanity's survival across the galaxy. The escalating conflicts with Xenos races, the growing influence of chaos corruption, and the internal strains that plague imperial administration create conditions that will continue to shape gang evolution, while providing opportunities for criminal organizations to adapt and thrive despite ongoing law enforcement efforts. The gangs that survive and prosper in this environment will be those that successfully balance the traditional elements of criminal enterprise with the new realities of militarized conflict and the complex political dynamics that govern imperial society in an age of unprecedented crisis and transformation.